is it working?
I logged out and logged back in.
Okay.
It's the camera.
Get yourself.
My screen, it says it's live on YouTube, so are we, Marty?
Okay, we're good.
When everybody gets here, Gwen, we're ready to go.
Okay, well, I think we're going to go ahead and start, and maybe some. Good morning. I'm going to call the Administration and Finance Committee to order. And before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that we will be doing public comment on the items that we have today, as well as public comment on items not on the agenda, but that we will be taking that comment via the telephone lines. So I would recommend, since this is a short meeting, that if people have comment on anything, they call in as soon as possible so that they can be in the waiting room. And when it is time for public comment, I will let you in to the meeting so that you may comment. Telephone number to call is, here we go, 253-215-8782. Meeting ID number is 960-049-3694. If you are vision impaired, 67-831-0333, and the ID number is 960-049-3694. Same ID number. And please be sure to mute your TV or computer when you are talking to avoid an echo. So while the public comment information is posted, I will take roll call, and then we'll get started with the minutes and public comment and the rest of the meeting. In terms of roll call, Anderson is absent, Becerra, absent, Contos.
Here.
Excellent, thank you. Harp.
Here. Yes.
Thank you. Hess.
Yes, I'm here. I'm having technical difficulties, so I'm audio only for now.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. Jones is present. Merritt is present. Ramos?
Present.
Present, thank you. Cheryl?
Present.
Thank you. Vasika present. Or, I'm sorry, Vasika?
Present.
Thank you. Von Lossberg? Present, thank you. And West?
Present.
Is present. Great, thank you so much. We have
Record, Stacy Anderson is joining us as well.
I see you there. Thank you. Yes, Stacy Anderson is present. We have minutes from May 6th of 2020 to approve. Were there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will stand approved. And is there any public comment on items not on the agenda, as well as those on the agenda? I'll make it broader, and if there's any comment on items on the agenda, we'll also take that. Is there anyone that wants to comment? We're going to give it a few seconds here to see if anyone comes to the waiting room. Okay, I am not seeing anyone, so we will go ahead with our business on the agenda for today, and continue to call for public comment throughout the meeting. The first item is 3.1, appointment to the Business Improvement District Board of Scott Stearns, and Mayor John Engen, I believe, is here to present on that this morning.
I am. Good morning, and thanks for having me virtually. I appreciate it. I've got a couple of appointments for you this morning. The first of which is an appointment to the Missoula Downtown Business Improvement District Board, asking you to confirm the reappointment of Scott Stearns. Many of you know Scott has worked a long time in the capacity as attorney for City of Missoula and has served a full term on the Business Improvement District Board. Good attendee, very interested in downtown, property owner in downtown Missoula, and represents a business that operates with more than 20,000 square feet of property in downtown. And as you may recall, Business Improvement District Board is comprised of a variety of property owners, large and small, and Scott's business fits into that larger category. He's enthusiastic, big fan of downtown, good contributor, and I hope he'll confirm his reappointment.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for the mayor regarding this appointment? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion.
Glenn, I can't find my window to raise my hand, but I will happily make the motion to reappoint Scott Stearns to the Business Improvement District Board.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Ramos. I saw your hand go up also, but thank you, Ms. Merritt. So there is a motion on the floor. Is there any public comment on this motion? I will keep looking in case anyone is in the waiting room to make public comment. And while we wait, is there any comment from council on this motion? All right, seeing none, we will take a roll call vote on this item. Marianne?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Anderson,
Yes.
Contos,
I think you're muted, John.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Harp,
Yes.
Hess,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Merritt,
Yes.
Ramos,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Vasika,
Yes.
Von Lossberg,
Yes.
West,
Yes.
unanimous in favor.
Thank you. That will go on the consent agenda. The next item that we have is 3.2, appointment to the Missoula Redevelopment Agency Board of Carl England. And this is also going to be addressed by Mayor John Engen.
And thank you again. Carl England has served with distinction on the Redevelopment Agency Board for many years, currently serves as the chairperson, brings a lot of institutional memory, again, a dedication to public service and intelligence, pardon me, to that board. And I hope that you'll confirm his reappointment as well.
Thank you for those comments. Are there any questions from any members of council to the mayor regarding this appointment?
Yes. Mr. Mayor, could you repeat some of that again? I'm cutting in and out here. Who is he and what is he for?
Carl England is the current chairperson of the Missoula Redevelopment Agency Board. He's served on that board for many years and has done so with distinction and intelligence.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions by any members of council for the mayor regarding this proposed appointment?
Gwen, I'm not sure if you're seeing my hand in the chat window. It's above Marty's.
Okay, sorry. Yes, go ahead, Brian.
Not a question, but I'm happy to make the recommended motion for Carl's reappointment.
Wonderful, thank you. If there is any public comment regarding this, please call in and I will look in the waiting room for you. And in the meantime, are there any comments by council regarding this appointment? Mr. Ramos.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. As you guys all know, I always vote to confirm the mayor's appointments. Him and I just have a little bit of a disagreement on TIF. I've heard great things about Mr. England. I have no doubt that he is a thoughtful man, but at the end of the day, I do not agree with his philosophy on TIF and do not approve of many of the purchases that he has voted for. And as council members, this is really our only chance to have any control over that money that's not a land purchase or a bond. So respectfully, I'm going to be voting no on Mr. England's reappointment.
Okay. Mr. Von Lossberg, I see your hand still raised in the chat box. Did you have another comment, or is that just left?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't speak to the motion when I made it. I just wanted to mention, and the mayor touched on this, but Carl has served as the chair for several years. I've attended, as many other council members, many MRA board meetings. Carl chairs that board effectively. He is conscientious with respect to good questions and eliciting input from the other board members. I've interacted with him on everything ranging from when we've done MRA disbursements to various projects they've approved, and I've just found him to be very conscious of the law around TIF and running an effective board for the community. And it's an honor to support his nomination to continue to serve.
Great, thank you. Ms. Cheryl, you had a comment?
I just wanted to say that I'll be supporting it as well. I think it's, having served on many boards and having chaired boards in the past, I think that running a meeting and being able to keep a group on task is really important. I also think that with MRA and any other board, it's really important that we have some historical knowledge on that board. So I do support having someone for a longer period of time and someone that understands economic development, because that is really complicated. And as we realize going through our training, the MRA is really complicated. So I will be supporting it, and I really appreciate that he's willing to continue to serve our community.
Great, thank you. Seeing no public comment on this item, just double checking. Nope, nothing. We will take a voice vote. We have one more item that we need to get to, so let's do the voice vote and we'll move on to the third item. Mary Ann.
Anderson,
Yes.
Contos,
No.
Harp,
Yes.
Hess,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Merritt,
Yes.
Ramos, no.
No.
Thank you. Cheryl,
Yes.
Vasika,
No.
Von Lossberg,
Yes.
West,
Yes.
three noes, 8 yeses.
Okay. All right, that will go on to
Consent agenda.
the consent agenda. All right, we'll put that on the consent agenda. That's fine. The last item that we have is 3.3, Community Development Block Grant Homeowner Housing Rehabilitation Contract with the Human Resource Council. And we have Colin Woodrow here to present on that. Colin, are you still with us?
I am.
Oh.
Thank you.
Oh, there you are. Lovely. Thank you.
Good morning, council members, Mayor Angan and Marty. The Office of Housing and Community Development is requesting the approval and authorization to enter a contract with Human Resource Council for the expenditure of $200,000 in Community Development Block Grant CDBG funds for their homeowner housing rehabilitation program. The Human Resource Council was awarded $200,000 of program year 2019 funds for homeowner rehab for qualifying households in Missoula under 80% AMI by City Council on May 13th of 2019. For reference, 80% AMI would serve a 4-person household with an annual income of $58,650 and below. Examples of potential eligible expenses include roofing, siding, and window replacement. HRC intends to leverage these funds with Northwestern Energy grant funds to assist with energy efficiency and healthy homes. The intent of the project is to preserve affordable home ownership. We've been working with HRC to ensure this project is successful both contractually and programmatically, and are looking forward to this program helping Missoulians. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Are there any questions from council? These are basically federal funds that come to Missoula. We are considered an entitled city, and so we are eligible for these funds. And my understanding, Colin, is that this is one of numerous categories that parts of these monies go to. And Human Resource Council has been a conduit for years, I believe, and does this type of work. So it's very useful to us. Are there any questions from council regarding this item? Seeing none, I'm looking for a recommended motion then. Oh, wait, Ms. Cheryl. Sorry, there are.
I don't think I was first. I think Julie and Brian had their hands up.
All right, sorry, I'm having difficulty with my window getting the hands up. So Ms. Merritt, let's start with you.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to just reiterate for council members what Gwen just said, is that the community development block grant money are federal funds that and the city of Missoula administers those. So these are pass-through dollars. This is not coming out of our general fund. And I am happy to make the motion to fund the Human Resource Council in this way. They do a lot of good work in our community. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Von Lossberg.
Thanks. Julie spoke to it well. I was also going to make the motion. Appreciate her highlighting those facts. And it's been my privilege in my role on council to work with Aaron's staff, Colin in Montana, and I think Karen now, on review of the different applications for the funding in these areas the last few years. Those recommendations have come back to the council for approval, and we've reviewed those as a package. And my understanding is, and Colin can certainly correct me if I'm getting part of this wrong, this is one of those specific items and the contract associated with it, and very happy to support.
Thank you. There is a motion on the floor that is in order, and if there is any public comment, please be calling in. In the meantime, Ms. Cheryl, you had a comment.
I'm just curious and I think Brian alluded to the fact that we've been pursuing these funds in the past, or they've been pursued. What is the history of this funding in our community?
Colin, are you able to answer that?
Yeah. The city of Missoula is an entitlement community. Entitlement communities are awarded funds automatically once a city has applied for that. For a city, it's a city with a population of 50,000 or larger. For a county or an urban county, it's 200,000 people or larger, and all 50 states and territories are automatically entitlement communities. Every year that another city or county reaches that scale and applies to become eligible for home and CDBG funds, they become entitlement communities. Montana has Missoula, Billings, and Great Falls. Bozeman is expected to become an entitlement community in the next few years. And so that is, we've had now nearly 2 decades of, or almost more than 2 decades, almost 3 decades of managing CDBG funds in Missoula.
Great, thank you. I see no public comment. Are there any other comments or questions from council? Oh, Ms. Anderson.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair. And I really want to echo what Colin said is how a community becomes an entitlement community is once you hit a certain threshold of population. And I can't help but make this plug at this exact moment that the way we get those tallies is by filling out the census. And so for all of those folks and community members and people watching this, it is super important that we take the time to fill out the census because this is how communities like ours get counted and are eligible for these entitlement dollars. So I just had to kind of make that connection for everyone since it still is a census season once every 10 years. So thanks so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we will have a roll call vote on this item.
Anderson,
Yes.
Contos,
Yes.
Harp,
Yes.
Hess,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Merritt,
Yes.
Ramos,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Vasika,
Yes.
Von Lossberg,
Yes.
West,
Yes.
unanimous in favor.
Thank you. That will go on the consent agenda. Thank you, everyone, for your cooperation today. And we will be adjourned.
Are the different meetings and new links?
Same link. So just keep it active. And I think last week folks stopped their video and such, but Marty's doing it under one link so that we don't have to
Nice.
keep doing new ones.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
You do mute
Okay,
to mute if you had,
so keep it muted and then unmute when they do the vote.
Marty, how are things looking on the admin end? My watch has 9:45. Are we ready to go?
Stacy, this is Kathy. I'm running eScribe and Diana is brand new. She's going to be running Zoom with Marty.
Okay, Diana, Kathy, and Marty. Kathy, is eScribe ready?
eScribe's ready.
All right, so great. We will get going. Welcome, everybody. This is the first meeting of Public Safety and Health in our new virtual format. So I ask for patience as we begin to navigate this. All of our committee members and staff are dialing in from remote locations as we are meeting virtually. So as with other public or committees, we are doing public comment on non-agenda items and agenda items a little differently. We will open up the phone lines for folks to call in to comment on the one agenda item as well as non-agenda items. And you will be on the screen right now. You can see that there is the call-in numbers as well as the meeting ID there for those folks who have difficulty seeing the screen. I'm going to read aloud the call-in numbers and the virtual meeting ID that you will enter when prompted. Please note that there is a 50-second delay when I call on you. You're going to hear chatter from your computer, but yet through your phone line, you're going to hear me prompting you to come and join us, similar to when you call into a radio station or for a telethon and whatnot. Let's see. And we have one person in the waiting room, but let me get this officially started. So we only have one agenda item today. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Can I get a roll call vote of all of the members present? Thank you, Kathy.
Anderson.
Here.
Contos.
Here.
Becerra. Absent. Harp. Here. Hess.
Here.
Jones. Here. Merritt.
Yes.
Ramos.
Here.
Cheryl. Absent. Vasika.
Present. Cheryl's present.
We have one person absent.
Fabulous. Okay, so we're going to head and go open the...
Brian, I'm here too.
And West.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, are all of those who are here. So I'm going to go ahead and take a quick moment and read the phone numbers for those folks who want to call in. The phone number is 267-831-0333. Or if you'd like to call on a toll-free number on a landline, you can call 1-888-475-4499. And when you're prompted, the meeting ID number is 960-049-3694. And note that you won't hear the meeting on your phone, but you'll hear it from your computer. And when you're called, please mute the computer or the TV, whichever format you're joining us on. So with that, we will get started. We do have meeting minutes to approve from our last meeting, which was on March 11th. Do we have any amendments or changes to the meeting notes? Okay, seeing no changes to the minutes, those will stand approved. We have one agenda item today, which is the confirmation of the mayor's reappointment of Dan Doyle to the Police Commission, and I will turn it over to Mayor John Engen to present on this item.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. Nice to see you all yet again on Zoom this morning. asking you to confirm the reappointment of Dan Doyle. Mr. Doyle has served as a member of this 3-person police commission for a number of terms. He is a retired University of Montana professor, has served with grace and dignity. As you know, the police commission serves as an independent body that reviews disciplinary action and complaints, as well as participates in interviews for new officers and handles other miscellaneous tasks on behalf of the mayor's office. Dan's a good-hearted man, even-keeled, and his colleagues and police staff appreciate his service and hard work, and I hope you'll approve his reappointment.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we will be taking public comment on this motion, or sorry, this item on the agenda. If anyone wants to call in and make a comment, I also would entertain a motion, or I see Ms. Harp has her hand up. Yes.
I would like to make the recommended motion to appoint Dan Doyle to this commission.
Great, that motion is in order. Is there any council comments on the motion? Okay. I don't see any council comments. We're going to give it just a moment more. Oh yes, I see Miss Merritt, your hand is up.
Thanks, Ms. Anderson. I just want to reiterate something that many of us on council have noticed is the great qualifications of people that are willing to serve on all the boards and commissions in our city, often sacrificing their own time to do so. And so I really appreciate Mr. Doyle's commitment and willingness to continue to serve.
Thank you, Ms. Merritt. Ms. Harp, did you have an additional comment?
I did. Sorry, I didn't say it before. I didn't speak to the motion, but I've known Dan Doyle for a number of years, and he is truly one of the most conscientious people I know. And he comes to the commission with a real love for criminal justice, and for that very particular reason, I'm very excited to support him in this particular police commission.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, we have a motion. We've had council comments. We have no members of the public who have called in the waiting room to join this or non-agenda items. So with that, I would move to a vote. Kathy, can you go ahead and read the roll, please?
Yes. Anderson.
Yes.
Contos.
Yes.
Harp.
Yes.
Hess.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Merritt.
Yes.
Ramos.
Yes.
Cheryl.
Yes.
Vaseka.
Yes.
Von Lossberg.
Yes.
West.
Yes.
Votes approved unanimous.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kathy. So that is our one and only agenda item. We all have survived the first meeting of the Public Safety and Health Committee in a virtual format. I thank you for joining us, and we will be adjourned. I will be now muting all of you for our time between now and land use and planning. And for those members of the committee, you don't actually have to log out and log back in on a new link. You can just stay on this link through till the next meeting. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.
to get started in just a few minutes. I'm going to give everyone a couple more minutes to get into the meeting. Can I just ask, we have a phone number, area code 314, and that phone number ends in 43. Is that one of our consultants?
Jordan, this is Jessica Garrow. I think that's Brooks from our consultant team.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Then I also have a 404 area code. Is that someone else from the consultant team?
I am not certain.
Okay, they've
Let me check if that's Nicole.
Hey guys, this is Brooks with the 404 number. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Okay, perfect.
I believe my audio is working now. This is Anna. Is that correct?
Yep, we can hear you, Anna.
Great, thanks.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the May 13th meeting of the Land Use and Planning Committee. This is, of course, a virtual meeting, and we're really grateful for everyone's flexibility for meeting us in this format. I'm really excited today to have guests from Design Workshop who will be talking through our subdivision and townhome exemption development project that we undertook a few weeks ago. First of all, just some logistics. This is a virtual meeting. If I could get the public comment slides up, that would be great. So for members of the public that are watching via live stream or via cable or our new YouTube live stream, we have this is a meeting with phone participation available. So you can call area code 253-215-8782 or toll free from a landline 888-475-4499, and then you'll enter a meeting ID, which is 960-049-3694. If you would like to give comment on any items that are on our agenda, as well as any items that are not listed on our agenda, you're welcome to call at this time. I will be monitoring the meeting throughout our meeting for anyone that does call in, and we'll try to provide a couple of opportunities for public comment throughout the meeting. So again, appreciate your patience. We're in good company on our YouTube live stream today. I saw several other city councils are meeting on YouTube live stream, and the Supreme Court oral arguments are being streamed today as well. So appreciate everyone adapting to this format. We have minutes from May 6th. Without objection, those will stand approved. Okay, so those will be approved. So we have just one regular, and then we'll do our roll call. I'm just going to call everyone off since it's a little easier than looking at the participant list. Anderson.
Present.
Becerra.
Present.
Contos.
Here.
Harp.
Here.
Hess is present. Jones.
Present.
Merritt. Oh, I think Ms. Merritt is absent for this meeting. Ramos.
Here.
Cheryl.
Present.
Vasika.
Present.
Von Lossberg.
Present.
And West.
Present.
Great. Okay, so we have just one regular agenda item, and again, public comment remains open. So I'll give those numbers one more time for anyone who I can't read them on the screen. It's 253-215-8782 or toll free 888-475-4499. Meeting ID 960-049-3694. So we have just one regular agenda item today, and this is our townhouse, our subdivision and townhouse exemption development regulation review project. I'm really excited about this project. I think we have a great opportunity to clean up our subdivision and TED regulations, make those regulations more functional for everyone involved, whether that's council or city staff, members of the public, and our development community. The city, through a competitive process, has contracted with Design Workshop, and we have several members of the Design Workshop team today to discuss the process and get the council's feedback. And so I'd like to turn it over to Lavelle Means from Development Services, and then let Lavelle introduce our guests from Design Workshop.
Thank you. This is Lavelle Means, Planning Section Manager for Development Services. And I may be repeating a few statements that Jordan just said. I was having some problems being able to hear the speak. I know it was going on. And I figured out what the problem was. But unfortunately, I might be just repeating what Jordan just said. But I don't have very much to say before I hand it over to our consultants. So my apologies. Development Services is starting a project to review our subdivision and TED regulations and process so that we can establish a framework for future changes to those regulations. It's been many years since we've looked at the subdivision regulations in a comprehensive way like this. And it's been only like less than a year since we've looked at the additional changes to the townhome exemption development regulations. We feel that there is a synergy and a relationship between those two processes. So part of this project will be able to look at that and create improvements for the entire community on how to craft regulations in the future. We've hired the nationally known consultant firm Design Workshop to help us with this project. They have expertise in knowing the development review process, both from the government review side of things, as well as the private project development side. And I think with that in mind, they're going to be able to bring that expertise forward, knowing we need regs and a process that works well for everyone. So this stage of review and exploration of ideas on how to explore the development regulations will result in a recommendations report. There will be a tangible report at the end of this process with Design Workshop that we will bring back to you for your review later in the fall. So with that, I'd like to introduce the project manager with Design Workshop. There are 3 other members of the Design Workshop consultant team on this meeting today, and I'll leave it to the manager to give additional information and introduction. Jessica Guerra will be the project manager working with us. We've already been engaged with her for a short while here, for about a month or so, getting to know the team really well. They're getting to know our processes and our regs really well, and I'm really thrilled to have them on board. Jessica will be, as I mentioned, providing additional introductions, giving you a bit of an overview of what the process will entail, and then be guiding you through some discussion where we hope we can have a really great back and forth with you on helping to set the tone, pulse, pace as we go forward. With that, I'll hand it over to Jessica, and then I think she will also be sharing the screen to give you a presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lavelle. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. I did want to, before we jump in, Nicole is our 314 number, and she's not having audio, so I don't know if someone could let that number in. That'd be great. As Lavelle said,
Nicole, can you hear now?
My name is, Nicole, can you hear? She can hear, but we can't hear her, it looks like.
Okay, how
We'll go
about
ahead and
now?
get started while we're week through that.
Nicole, can you try one more time?
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you. Jordan, is it okay if I share my screen?
Yeah, go right ahead. Thanks, Jessica.
Great. All right, so I am Jessica Garrow. I am the project manager for this project with Design Workshop, and we're really thrilled to be working with the City of Missoula to analyze subdivision and TED regulations. A little bit about me, I have a 15-year career in municipal government and actually joined Design Workshop last summer. I was previously a community development director and long-range planner. And so subdivision and land use regulations are really near and dear to my heart, and I really enjoy working on them and helping streamline processes, and really looking forward to working on this recommendation report. I wanted to turn it over to Anna very briefly to introduce herself. She's our principal in charge here with Design Workshop.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for having us today. As Jessica said, my name is Anna Laybourne, and I've been with the firm Design Workshop for 14 years and was really grateful to recruit my friend Jessica to come work with us this last summer. I'm a planner and really love supporting our projects that bring us to communities that are, mountain communities, those that are really in a beautiful environment setting that the community wants to create a high quality of life, address challenges like affordable housing, and really be inspired by the place that you are located and make sure that you're following through on some environmental ethics. So that's why we're really excited to be in Missoula working with you all and supported by a great team of additional planners and Brooks with housing and economic support.
So Nicole is a planner with the firm, and maybe do you want to just say hello real quick?
Hi, everyone. I'm looking forward to helping you. Like Laval said, I have experience with assisting the development community with land use and entitlement applications, and then also providing recommendations for communities like you to improve their process. So looking forward to helping.
And then finally, we have Brooks Coles, who is part of our strategic services group within the firm. And he and I are going to be mostly leading the presentation today. Brooks, do you want to say hi?
Plug for the intro. Hey, guys. I'm Brooks Coles. As Jessica said, I've been with the firm about 2 years. I'm one of few people within the firm that's not a planner or a designer by trade. And I came from the private side, and I think taking a two-headed approach to this project is pretty great. So I kind of look at this project through a developer lens, while Jessica and the rest of the team have a wealth of public experience. And so combining those two, I think, is kind of our best way to come up with recommendations that work for Missoula and ultimately increase supply. So looking forward to it.
Great. So what we wanted to do was just really quickly go through our project schedule, since this is the first opportunity that we've had with Land Use Policy Committee. We have a 6-month project schedule, and right now we are right here, tracking pretty well despite what's going on with COVID. We had anticipated originally being in person for this meeting, but we've made a transition, particularly for these early stages, to the online meeting format. We anticipate having a final recommendations report towards the end of September. Right now, we're really focused on the initial community engagement for this project, which is pretty targeted. We are working with a working group that we should be meeting with next week. Or the week after. And then we'll be doing some focus groups, everything from folks involved in creation of affordable housing to development community, folks involved with natural resources, We've had an initial meeting with some technical staff members to understand kind of the process from their perspective and what's working and what's not. And so we are kind of tracking along despite COVID. We have continued to anticipate an in-person kind of community open house towards the end of this process. If that's not possible, we've been working with Lavelle and Ben in the planning office on Engage Missoula. And so we are working to create a page through that platform so that there's an opportunity for some additional engagement. And if we're not able to do the in-person open house later on, we can pretty easily flip into that format. So I wanted to just pause here and see if there were any questions related to the overall schedule before we move forward.
One thing that I'd add, Jessica, is that the schedule is kind of aggressive, and one of the reasons for this in the scoping process was that we're coming into a legislative year, and we believe that there may be some priorities for legislative changes that might come through us or through the League of Cities and Towns or other statewide organizations. So we want to make sure that there's plenty of lead time to not only simplify procedures possibly for next construction season, but also make any statewide recommendations. Any other questions? Okay, I think we can carry on.
All right, great. So this was included in your packet of materials from Lavelle, but we wanted to just do high level kind of project goals. What are we trying to accomplish here? And as Jordan said, one of the main pieces of this is making sure that we can identify opportunities for influencing state law within this next legislative session. So we're looking to focus on outcomes. How can we create a recommendations report that then Missoula can use to actually amend your code, amend potentially some of your processes to make the subdivision process as well as the townhome exemption development process run a little bit more smoothly, clearly, have kind of alignment of understanding within the community. Ultimately, if implemented, kind of this last piece, will lead to a land use review process that's easy to administer and understand. So easy from a staff perspective, easy from a council perspective, planning board, development community, and general community as kind of the big overarching goal. Throughout the process to date over the last few weeks, we have had a number of kind of individual meetings, some initial focus groups, and we've asked folks this list, and this was a pulse survey that was part of your packet for this meeting, what's working well and what could be improved. That was the circles and the X's within the packet. And what we heard is that staff is really wonderful, and staff really tries to help people through a process. And then everything else is kind of red, right? Continuing to try to make some progress, but it's not exactly where it needs to be. And so what we've done is we wanted to kind of highlight the green are what we've heard works well, right? Preserving health, safety, welfare, which is really important. You want to make sure your process is doing that. And it's aligning relatively well with current state law. The rest of these are areas where we might have some improvements. So we wanted to, before we get into some kind of questions and really gaining your perspective on all of this, we wanted to see, does this resonate? When you were going through the X's and the O's on that pulse survey, did you have a similar thoughts, or is there something here that is in red that is actually working pretty well that you want to make sure that we understand? And Jordan, I'll rely on you to see if folks are raising hands and calling on folks.
Great, yeah, and I'm monitoring the participant window, so if anyone wants to say anything at any point, just raise your hand. All right.
Is it all good?
Maybe we can circle back to this if there's more,
Yeah.
if folks have additional feedback on this later on.
That sounds great. Okay, so this is where we really want to take this opportunity to understand from your perspective. Oh, was there something?
One question that I had actually is there, there's a lot of red here. Do you have sort of a sense of a prioritize, like what is sort of the highest priority in your meeting so far, as maybe the couple of these bullet points that folks really feel need improvement?
Yeah, definitely. So, and this is why we've picked some of the policy questions to drill into in these next slides. But something that we've specifically heard is alignment between policy documents and regulatory framework as something that is maybe been improving, but there could be some focus there. Reducing review time and simplifying the process is one that we've heard as a priority. Increasing alignment between regulations. And this is something that I think happens in a lot of communities where individual regulations are adopted. And then once you layer them on top of one another, it becomes a little bit more complicated than you intended. And so we've heard that. Brooks, anything else to add from what we've heard so far?
Yeah, I think what's been really interesting and has kind of developed through conversations, getting to the process was not necessarily something we heard, and obviously that's kind of a big, broad statement. We know that reducing barriers is important, reducing expense and reducing times were all important. But I think through the conversations we've had, we've realized that a lot of those expenses, barriers, and times seem to be a product of getting to the process and having it reviewed by city staff. So, we kept hearing that by the time it made it to its review period, it would have to be re-engineered or redesigned because the whole process was taking so long. So that's something where, maybe the root of the problem has shown to be the lack of alignment and predictability. So it all falls within the bucket. But I would just say personally, a priority seems to have come out that we need to get projects to review before they need to be re-engineered or redesigned.
Great. So we do have a couple questions come. I have first Ms. Jones and then Ms. Cheryl.
Thanks. I guess I just wanted to articulate something. I'm looking at this list and I had gone through and I'd filled it out, and I think this is a good reflection, the green and the red. But something that I don't see in there is, I guess, the fact that I feel like the wards that we represent in this city all tend to have very different characters. I represent an older ward that is mostly built in, that has a lot of older structures. And I feel like in the 5 years I spent on council, there's been a fair amount of time talking about the fact that we have a great growth policy. It calls for more density, but how do we build that density, especially in already established neighborhoods, that is accepted by the community? And we talk about scaling, we talk about character. We do not have any tools to address that. And then of course, we also talk about affordable housing and trying to simplify things and not have too much regulation. So that issue of scaling and incorporating greater density into pre-established neighborhoods, I don't know that I see that in here, but I just wanted to put it out there because I think that's an important issue. And I know this is a little bit broader, but I want you guys to be chewing on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say that adds some really good nuance to this number 10, responds to different physical areas within the city. And so appreciate that. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Okay, I have Ms. Cheryl and then Ms. Becerra next.
So I'm curious, I've only been on council for 5 months, 2 of which we've been locked down. So I don't necessarily have a good sense of, whether there's something that I would add to this or that I disagree with, but I am curious, who all completed this survey? How broad was that group? And also, if you don't mind, Mr. S., how do we align with kind of do you have an early assessment of how we align with best practices when you go into other communities, kind of how far off we are, like how many are red and how many are green? I'm just trying to get a sense of where we are.
Yeah, so this survey is one that we've used for a technical team meeting. So staff members who have been involved with the process. And we've had kind of an initial, what I would call focus group with the Development Community Committee that the Development Services Group holds every month. And so this is where this is coming from, in addition to an initial kickoff meeting that we had with folks who are kind of involved within the process. So Councilman Hess, Lavelle, and some others from the city, as well as development community representatives. So we're continuing to kind of gather data here. So this is not kind of it, but it's been such a theme and so consistent that we, instead of just saying, you know, what do you think is working, what is not, we wanted to get your reflection on kind of what we've heard so far to see if it hits the mark or not. In terms of best practices, I might toss that over to Brooks. It's one of our initial tasks, and we're getting ready to kind of launch into that. And one of our questions later on in this meeting is, what does council identify as kind of your best practice peer communities, so we can make sure that we're targeting that work appropriately? Brooks, do you have anything to add there?
You did. There we go. I think as far as this list, I would say this was really kind of showed, you know, we wanted to know what is working well and maybe isn't necessarily on the table for these recommendations. So the fact that the majority is red with only 2 green options just kind of shows that there's a lot to be kind of holistically reviewed throughout the process. And a lot of these can be reviewed concurrently and improved concurrently. So I don't think that's by any means a lack of who gave input. I think there was general consensus that, as we saw in the housing framework, that, you know, this whole process needs to align with itself and with other policies better. And best practices will be a big piece of that. And that's, again, where I think we're going to dive into understanding what Missoula community standards are. And as we go to choose those, we want to find, you know, we want to look at best practices nationally and then zoom into community specific localities where, you know, it might have the same lifestyle, a similar prioritization of environment, as well as a similar problem. You know, what's the affordable housing crisis and how have they addressed it?
Thanks. Next, Ms. Becerra, and then Mr. Ramos on deck.
Thank you. And I guess my question is somewhat along the lines of what Ms. Cheryl asked. I see a lot of red, and so I curious to know mostly where that's coming from, if it's from the builders development community or if it's equally shared by staff. I think for me, it's important to know who's saying what to make sure that we align, you know, the results for both. Because sometimes, you know, I think as staff tries to make things less complicated and follow the regulations, that is not perceived on the other side of the equation. And so just wondering who's saying what, just to make sure that we address that correctly. And also, I think I would like to know the longevity of the results. I'm seeing a lot of things that speak to the needs that we have right now, but I would really like for this process to allow us to have to be beyond what the needs are right now, beyond the affordable housing crisis, something that can be long lasting and that
continues to work well with some of the other regulations that we have in place. But overall, I think it's great to have all of this, 19 points that need to be addressed. A little bit of a daunting task. Yeah, so it just curious to know who is saying what, because for me, it would be important to know. Are we really that far off from how the community perceives the challenges compared to, the staff and the city and administration? Thanks.
So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just, go ahead, Jessica, and then I think Lavelle, you wanted to weigh in as well, it looked like. So go ahead.
I was actually going to see if Lavelle wanted to maybe answer that first piece.
Thank you. I am trying to get familiar with your techniques here, and probably the hand up isn't the right way to do it. Sorry.
The clapping worked too. That's totally fine.
Yay. I don't see that the what should be improved as like, oh my God, there's a lot of things that are going wrong. I see it as, we're always trying to improve things, and we do have good recognition of community standards, but the challenge is like, what more can we do to keep balancing and looking at ways that we can address the needs that we have in our community while still maintaining those other things. So it's really, I look at it as more work to do, not a negative on we're not doing these things. One that came up was results in visionary change. That's something that, in every process, we shouldn't be settling on our sort of status quo approach, but be thinking about how do we improve and take that into consideration with recommendations for the regulations going forward. So we do work and focus on alignment with our framework, but what more can we do? The city and our departments keep, we keep having improved policy, new policy that you're considering, and we want to think about how that comes into alignment and is being considered while we're thinking of our regulations. So I look through many of these items and I see we're doing well, but there's other things we want to keep working on. I hope that helps. And this isn't a technical survey of sorts. It's really a starting point. And when we started this process, even with scoping back in the last year, we knew the work we had to do was focusing on creating enhanced predictability and improved review times, et cetera. But always that is going to be in the context of what can we do and how far can we go with changing or improving review times, given that state law holds a lot of the sideboards out there for us. So it's also in context of the regulatory or how much latitude we actually have within state law. So those are more detailed focusing pieces of this process that we will be getting into. I hope that answers your question or part of it. Thank you.
Okay. So I have Mr. Ramos next, and then Ms. Harp on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. So quickly, I just want to state that I think this is phenomenal. I was a little skeptical going into it, but I think that these points are something that we need to address. And unfortunately, we have to look in the mirror to address a lot of these things. I've been trying to talk about this stuff for the last couple of years, and I think these are all very good points. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to the department or the bureaucracy or anything like that. But at the end of the day, we have to be self-honest, and we have to realize that a reason why a lot of these things are red is because we're not addressing them. And that's why affordable housing is non-existent in Missoula, because we have all these different areas, and we've paid God knows how much money for these consultants to tell us that. But in order for this to work, we have to kind of reflect on ourselves and realize that we need to make these changes. I think that they're phenomenal, but I guess I'll hammer in on my first question. So when you say promote access to affordable housing, I mean, there's a big debate between affordable housing, whether it's subsidized or market affordable housing. So I was hoping that maybe you guys could address that again. I think this is a great list, but I was just hoping if it was market affordability or subsidized affordability.
So I think that, Lavelle, did you want to start on that one?
I think we're going to take our guidance from the housing department more on that as well. I think we are becoming, with a housing policy document in place, we are looking forward to the meaning refinement of definitions. And right now we're general, and I think as this process goes along, we can see what that looks like as we get into the recommendations report, but we will be looking for a lot of guidance from the housing policy document.
Okay, and quick follow-up.
Go ahead with your follow-up.
Yeah, I think somebody else was talking, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, and I guess my next question isn't specific to this set of lists, but I mean, we've seen similar recommendations like this before. And we just saw that apartment rents went up 9% this year due to a lack of supply. I mean, we have a developer right now that's purchased a substantial chunk of property out George Elmer, and he's, in my opinion, single-handedly responsible for rents being as low as they are right now. Without him and his developments, I think we could easily be seeing rents 30-40% higher, and the city kind of changed the rules midstream on him, and I think this is what this plan is trying to address. But I guess I'll wrap it up just by asking, how do we know that this plan, and what are you guys going to do to make sure that these actually get implemented, and we don't just sit here and talk about how they're a good idea, but it actually gets pushed through? Because again, I've seen recommendations like this several times since being on council, so this is a question for the consultant team.
Well, I'd take a first stab at that, Jesse. I think, and then I'll turn it over to the consultant team. I think that, just from a policy standpoint, it's important to remember that we are the city's policy body, and so we have the opportunity to set policy, and so that's why the committee's feedback and the council's feedback is so important, because ultimately it'll be council action that causes this policy to be put into place. And Jessica, you want to take the rest of that?
Yeah, and I think from my experience in the public sector, you can't do everything at once, right? If everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. So one of the things that we plan on doing is identifying what are maybe the low-hanging fruit, some of those first things that are maybe easier to implement, and then what are maybe a medium and a long term. That way, the city has a path to make all of these changes. And you may want to tackle some of the more difficult items first, but our job is to outline what does that look like, right? How will you, how should you implement changes within process that maybe doesn't require an amendment to your code? Also, what do you need to do to amend your code to make sure that it is more predictable, it's more aligned? And so we'll be having a recommendations report that tries to address both.
Phenomenal. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Okay, next, Ms. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. Jessica, you answered actually some of my questions that I've had, but as we kind of speak to predictability and trying to make sure that we can make the process of building more housing more affordable and more quickly come to market. One of the other things that I was just looking at our zoning map of the city, and I'm wondering if we're going to talk about about zoning as part of this discussion, because when I look at the map, probably, and I might be misreading this, so bear with me because it's kind of tiny, but roughly 3/4 of our city limits is at residential 5.4 or less dense. And And so it begs the question, like, if we are truly trying to be intentional about bringing more housing stock to market, how are we going to be actually able to do that so that it is equitably shared across all neighborhoods?
So I think part of this is going to come as we learn more about your code, more about how the code interacts with the housing policy guide and those types of things. And while the report is really focused on the subdivision and the TED process, those things do not happen in isolation. They have interaction with zoning, with stormwater requirements, with wildfire requirements, right? All kinds of things. And so while we are not going to be diving deeply into those kind of tangentially related items, we do anticipate having recommendations that talk about just that. So there could be a recommendation that you might want to examine the densities that are allowed within different areas of town. Again, kind of going into how do we respond to the different physical areas within the city. And so that could look different from a zoning perspective versus a subdivision perspective. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you very much.
Okay, Ms. West and then Ms. Vasika.
All right, I have a couple of questions, and one kind of centers around kind of the unique ownership structure that comes along with TEDs. Obviously, we're kind of looking at this more from the land use side of things, but every time a TED's developed, those come with declarations and covenants, which can restrict some of the uses. And one that comes to mind that a lot of covenants restrict, at least on paper, is childcare, in-home childcare facilities. And I was wondering if you see some avenue in which to influence what is in the declarations that are filed with TED developments. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And what I would say is, so before we finalize the report, we, as part of the technical team from the city, have expertise from the city attorney's office. So some of this will be what can the city actually do versus what is maybe a limitation from state law. So that would be kind of part of that final layer and analysis before we complete the report. But these are the types of things that we really want to hear about now. What are some of the concerns that you have? And so we can appropriately address them within the recommendations report.
Yeah, so I guess I would love there to be some a look at childcare facilities and also things that restrict adding things to roofs. For example, I know a lot of covenants can restrict solar as well, which of course isn't in line with some of our community goals. And I would love for there to be some, I work in affordable housing and was involved with a TED development. And so I got to work with an attorney to draft our particular covenants and, made sure that those sorts of things were allowed. But I know that across the community, I think people kind of use, shared draft, a basic guideline. And a lot of them are old and out of date and maybe don't reflect the uses we would like to see overall. So I'd like that to be on the list. And I guess I just have one more question if that's all right, Jordan.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my other one is basically bringing these policies in line with, I guess, other community goals we have, whether it's our complete streets policy or I guess I'm wondering what the process is to bring these in line with maybe bigger goals and kind of how that, if there's like a checklist you're working through or almost like a matrix of like, these are the policy suggestions we have, and these are the boxes it ticks for these different like broader goals. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And I think before we can really answer that, we wanted to have this discussion with you and understand what are priorities related to implementing those policies within code versus having them as overarching kind of guiding policies for the city. So we've got some questions where we're asking kind of where is Land Use Policy Committee on that spectrum of fully implementing things within code as requirements versus having them as overarching. And so we're interested to hear that from this group.
So, Ms. Basika, any questions that you have? And then I think at this, after you go, I think we'll move on to the rest of the presentation and then the other discussion items, if that sounds good to everyone. Ms. Basika, go ahead.
So I just had a quick clarification question. Was it city staff that filled out the survey?
Yeah, members of our technical team, which included representatives from the county environmental health, fire, building, zoning, planning, housing, engineering, public works. I might be missing a few. Lavelle, did I miss any?
I think inside development services and engineering, it's city agencies that look at regulations overall.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
And can I clarify too that were you asking if there were non-city staff as well, or if it was just city staff, or I might have misinterpreted.
Oh, well, now I am. Now I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so we've had members from the development community, the development community committee that meets every month with Lavelle and the development services team, as well as the technical team.
Okay,
And
thank you.
So, sorry, the group that helped with the selection of the consultant, we called them back to ask just, general startup of the process, kickoff questions that help to create a narrowed in set of ideas here as well.
Okay, Mr. Van Lasberg.
I think you covered it. I just was going to highlight that, as Lavelle was mentioning, that group included the development community as well. I just want to make it absolutely clear that the development community and staff folks have done this survey. So,
okay, I think we can move on to move on throughout the presentation.
Great. Okay, we have a few kind of specific questions. We tried to keep them high level as opposed to getting into nitty gritty of specific land use cases you may have seen, or specific kind of parcel based questions or issues. And these first questions are really about the city's role in regulation. So one of the common themes was we'd like to maybe see more flexibility within the process. And so our first question for you is, what's your preference regarding regulatory flexibility? So this could be different for different types of regulations. As an example, you probably want site triangles to be a requirement and not just a suggestion, because that is a kind of health safety issue. But besides those issues, other things that are maybe more related to policy, implementing some of the policy documents within the code, what's your preference for regulatory flexibility? Should these things be mostly suggestions? Should they be written into the code, or is it maybe a mix of both? Brooks, do you have anything to add on this one?
I think I'll listen for answers before I chime in.
Great.
What's most useful from your perspective as far as how we go about? I mean, we could kind of go around and people could address these, or we could. I just want to make sure that we're providing feedback in the method that's most useful.
So what I would say is, if folks have a number in mind, you could use the chat feature, and we can kind of tally from there, or Anna's, which is do your hand. And if you have something that you would specifically want to weigh in on related to this question, to do the raise hand feature so that we can hear from you.
Okay, I want to be really careful that everything gets into the public record. So if things do go into the chat, I will read them off just so that they get into the record. I guess beyond that, I don't have a strong preference. Strong feelings, anyone? Heather?
Jordan, this is Heather.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess one question I have for today is, are we giving you this feedback today that you then move forward with, or are we going to come back and revisit these questions again in the, next time?
Yeah, it's a good question. We may not revisit the exact questions when we come back, but this is not, direction we get today is just to help us chart an initial course. This is, what you say today is not kind of etched in stone, so to speak. We want to hear just generally kind of what are your thoughts around these issues so that we can target our research and the additional community engagement. So we're kind of asking the right questions as we move through.
Okay, fair enough. Follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So if we take a look at your first question, what is your preference regarding regulatory flexibility? And you had previously given 2 examples, one where it's more of a safety regulation versus one that's just a policy driven. Would it make more sense to, subdivide that question?
Absolutely. I think we wanted to leave this open for you all to respond in a way that kind of makes sense. So please feel free to kind of direct this as you see fit.
Okay, I'll wait to hear back from others.
And I think maybe we can just not get so hung up on, I'm not going to say that I'm a 6.5 on this scale or that kind of thing, but maybe use it as a discussion framework. I mean, I think there is a lot of nuance in all of these, and just the discussion I think will be really useful. So Ms. West and then Ms. Cheryl.
Sorry, I have a hard time unmuting myself. So I think I'll just give you my thoughts on both of these on this slide real quick. I think that I would gear towards less regulatory flexibility, but allow for context sensitivity. For example, if you're on a dead end street in the upper Rattlesnake and you're putting in a TED, maybe sidewalks don't make as much sense because there aren't pedestrians and there aren't any cars, or aren't as many cars as the big one. But I think it is important to set expectations across the board. And on the second issue of level of oversight and between subdivisions or TEDs, I think one big thing that I found really frustrating is that our current process is really confusing to the public and leads to a lot of frustration when, for example, on a rezone, the public isn't given an image of what's going to be built, but when we're approving a TED, there's a whole lot of detail. And if you don't understand the nuances between the 2 processes, it seems unfair. The amount of information that the public's receiving is very different, even though maybe it seems the same. I think being able to communicate with the public on a more even level between those 2 processes would be nice.
Thank you.
Jordan, do you want me to go?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it would be just a thought. I think it would be really nice to hear everyone weigh in on this. I think it'd be helpful for the new council members that have not gone through as many of these as some of those that have been on council longer. And I think that it's important that we all give some level of thought and direction in this process. So I would kind of advocate for everyone having some weighing in.
Okay, I'm happy to weigh in. I think that I'm going to start with the second question. I think that board review is important, or council review is important when there is ambiguity, when there is a lack of clarity, and when expectations are different. So I think if the public has a very clear expectation, if the public and the development community and the council and everyone involved have a very clear expectation of what's allowed, I think administrative review is entirely appropriate. I think that administrative review of projects up to a certain size is something that we've done in our TED regulations, and I think in particular I really dislike our conditional use process, and I think that leads to some uncertainty, and it leads it puts in a box, and I think at the end of the day, members of the public who are providing comment, developers and council members, are all unsatisfied with some of those processes. And so I think if there are clear regulations, we can move to more administrative review, and we can save the council and board review for things that are more a little bit more nuanced. I think a great example of council or board review is something like our design excellence process. If we have design specific or questions or things that need to be reviewed, we have our design review board, which is staffed with design professionals, and I think that's a great way to go. Stacy, I'm sorry, I just saw your note. Stacy is a co-host and therefore cannot raise her hand, so I haven't been calling on her this entire meeting. So I'll call on you next. The regulatory flexibility, I think it is a little of both, but I think that I lean more toward requirements that are clear and straightforward and predictable, and I don't think requirements have to be onerous. I think requirements set the stage for clarity and for predictability, and so I think what I've heard time and time again from the development community is that predictability is what they are seeking, and I think predictability serves council and the public well as well. Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. I always try to make a life, not to go after Jordan because he always speaks so eloquently. So made many of my several points, but one of the biggest things that I find as a level of frustration is, especially in the last couple of years, is there seems to be a sentiment, right or wrong, that the TED, going with a TED was easier than going through a subdivision. And so it kind of created a situation within the development community, at least from my perspective, that it seemed like people were trying to kind of morph their projects into fitting into the, their round hole project into the square peg of a TED. And then it put us at council into, a situation where we're trying to have to like shave off the edges to make those projects work. And so in terms of regulatory flexibility, I just want to make sure that one path isn't seen as more advantageous or easier or streamlined than the other, that they basically are really kind of meant to fit the nuances and the niche and the type of developments, be it a subdivision, be it a TED. Now we've done a little bit of that with the changes to the TED regulations that we have made over the last year. But I just, want to make sure that the processes moving forward don't kind of create this unintended byproduct, that they are both very clear. They're both, seem to fit the intended use of the project. And I think I would be more inclined for less regulatory flexibility, because then it puts us in a position of, somewhat interpreting, if the things, it's really easy when the rules are clear cut, the standards are clear cut, we have check marks and checklists, and you go forward and everyone knows, and it the rules of the game, and it's very laid out for everyone to follow. So that is kind of around regulatory flexibility. I realize that we don't want to create cookie cutters, and every piece of, we're not making any more land. And so making sure that projects fit into, what Miss Jones said in terms of the different types of neighborhoods and keeping the soul of Missoula, is very important. But I think we can do that as well as having like clearly defined regulations. But that's kind of where I'm coming down at this point in time. So.
Mr. Van Lossberg.
Thanks, and I'll apologize for being inarticulate in advance. I share a lot of the same sentiments that Jordan suggested, and I have some difficulty responding, and it's probably getting wrapped around the axle a bit on how to fit into the scales. But I guess what I would express is on the, I don't like the idea of regulatory flexibility being simply suggestions. What I like is being able to, or what I think makes sense is being able to identify objectives that we want the regulatory framework to achieve, and then having multiple ways for the development community to meet that objective. Not simply that the objective is a suggestion. I think the objective becomes whatever sort of sphere it's in is very important, but prefer that the development community has multiple ways to achieve that. And if they do, the less involvement, frankly, from council or board review, the better to get at that that ability of predictability, basically. So I think I wind up falling below 5 kind of on both of these, with that sense of wanting to provide that predictability and not extend timeframes, which adds cost, and sort of the subjectivity associated with the reviews. I think Jordan hit a really important point where we've had multiple experiences, particularly of late, where the development community, the council, and the public are all pretty dissatisfied with the process. And that should be telling us something. So, and yet I have had no doubt that each of those 3 groups, if you will, is acting with fairly good intentions. So I'm not making much sense. I think I'll cut it off there.
Okay.
It made lots of sense. That's helpful.
Anyone else on these items? Mr. Ramos?
Is it possible to go negative on these bad boys? Kidding.
Sure.
I would say I am somewhere between a 0 and a 1. I certainly agree with Mr. Von Lossberg's point that the flexibility needs to be a little bit, and Ms. Anderson's point, where it can't necessarily be left up to interpretation. It does need to be codified in some way so that everybody's treated fairly. And I think that also adds the predictability portion of it, because, flexibility can be interpreted by any administration, any city council in 100% different ways. So I don't think it addresses the predictability portion that does give the developer a little bit of predictability, so that he is making a calculated risk and take some risk off the table for him or her when they're making a development. So those are just my thoughts. I think regulatory flexibility should be codified, as in removing a ton of regulations, but I might be alone on that. But that's my feedback. So 0 to 1.
Ms. Jones.
Thanks. I think these are really hard questions to answer. Just wanted to say that first of all, this is hard to answer, and I've been trying to chew it over, and it's interesting. The words that I was coming up with are a little bit different, but I think a lot of the same themes as Ms. Anderson, Mr. Von Lossberg, and so I thought I'd just throw it out there. In my mind, what I would like to see are really clear sideboards so that everybody knows where those sideboards is and there is no issue of interpretation. And I think that's what creates the predictability and the certainty. And then the word I was using in terms of flexibility is options, having options within those sideboards. And that's what Brian was talking about. I think to just have it be the Wild West with you can build whatever you want, wherever, and do whatever the heck you want is not the quality of life that we have come to expect in 2020 and in Missoula, Montana. So we need sideboards, but to create clear sideboards and clear options. And I feel like something I'd like to articulate also is periodically things do come to council for zoning, for conditional review process, for TEDs. And sometimes they're straightforward, sometimes they aren't. And painful as that process is, and as Brian said, when council, staff, public, and developer are all unhappy with the process, nonetheless, it is valuable in that it shows a gap, it shows where we need to address something. And so we just need to use that constructively. And that's why we're in this process right now, because we've had some of those situations. So growth pains, I guess that's what I would call them. And I'm not quite sure how it is structured so that that door is open at times when things need to come to council or for review. But that's the value of our process. And that's how we get public input. So I just I guess the words I used are clear sideboards with options with no sideboards. And I think I've used this example before, but I remember when my kids were little, they did this art class and I loved this art teacher. She would give them a limited palette and no matter what they did with it, it looked beautiful, as opposed to giving them too much and just having a big, awful child art that I threw out then later on. But I saved all of those pieces of art from that class because there were sideboards and then options within those sideboards. So that's what I'm going to leave you with today.
Hey, Ms. Vasica and then Ms. Becerra.
Ms. Cheryl wanted everyone's opinion, so I will give mine. I am Jesse pretty much hit the nail on the head for me, but I want to go a little bit lower to 0 on that. I'm a big fan of less regulatory procedure. So I don't think it would be the Wild West if there was less regulatory procedure with this, but I am still new, so I might be off on that. But I do believe that everyone all the developers would put the good of the neighborhood at heart. So I just would like to put my 2 cents of the 0 for both questions on that.
Ms. Becerra and then Mr. Ramos again.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that this is it's not easy to answer for me either, but I think that, and I think it's mostly because we're talking about trying to have predictability and flexibility at the same time. And sometimes those two things are hard to carry forward together under one regulation. So I think that I fall somewhere in the middle, but maybe more towards having regulatory process. And I think that for me, based on the public process, to have predictability around that, participation, information, as long as that's addressed, I think that it would erase some of the confusion that seems to exist around both subdivisions and TEDs. And I think that we need to be flexible in terms of the context, the environment, the size of each one of any potential project that comes along. I think it's been mentioned before by my colleagues that having a TED on a hillside, it's not the same as having a TED within our city core. The size of it is, will dictate what kind of sideboards we have for those developments. So I would say that I am in the middle only because I don't think that when it's just a suggestion I can trust that the public process will be as robust as it should be. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Ramos, and then Ms. Cheryl.
Hey, Mr. Hess, I'll be real quick. I just wanted to clarify, not looking for the Wild West. I know sometimes it probably seems that way. Just looking for a substantial reduction, I guess, in the regulatory environment, just because I see that as essentially a tax cut and a pay raise to lower income Missoulians, because all those regulations and all the cost of that regulatory environment is passed on to the homeowner at the end of the day, and it's usually passed on in a markup. So that's simply what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting a little bit stronger private property rights here in Missoula, and also suggesting that we let the market do the sideboards. I mean, a hotel developer or a developer of any kind isn't going to build a garbage product because then it won't sell. They're going to take into account the neighborhood as well, because if they put up something that doesn't belong, I can guarantee you in Missoula there's going to be a heck of a lot of protests going on. So that's all I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting less government control, more market control over that. Just want to clarify. Thank you for giving me the extra time, Mr. Chair.
Yep, thanks. Ms. Cheryl, and then Ms. Harp.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I don't think that just regulations are going to solve our affordability problems. So I think it's way more complex than that. I think that can help in some ways. I'm a little bit, I guess, and similar to Sandy. I mean, I'm pretty new to this, but I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I do want some predictability for our developers, but there needs to be some flexibility in there. I'm also just curious to hear from the team, how often do most communities rewrite these rules? I'm not sure exactly how long it's been for us. I missed that at the beginning, I think someone said. And then as we change policies, as we add additional policies or amend policies that we have, like the climate resiliency policy, like if we are really, I mean, how do we make those mesh as we go along as well? So I think we need I agree with Ms. Jones. I think we need some sideboards, but we need some flexibility. And I think, especially if we're not going to kind of be on a regular rewrite and review process, which I think it's been quite a while, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know who that question's for.
Jordan, should I take that question? About, it has been almost 10 years since we've taken a deeper look at the regulations for subdivision. We did a rewrite, but not a lot in the way of sort of content revisiting in about 2010. And then a couple years after that, we did some work on the street and road standards. We have some regulations that need to get updated related to the state law. And we have only limited resources. So we've been putting a lot of emphasis on working on our zoning regulations, and there haven't been that many subdivisions and subdivision activity. So, I'd say probably due to just the places where we were putting our priorities and our work plan, we hadn't done a comprehensive look at the subdivision regs. I think right now we have an opportunity with new information from the other policy emphasis on housing and climate readiness, and what we might learn from an update to the long range transportation plan, et cetera, to be able to use that to inform the recommendations report in this cycle. But yeah, it is something we need to be thinking about, because we do continually look at ways to align and address and be ready for a changing community. So, what we do with our work plans and resources a couple years from now is something else to think about in the future.
Thank you. May I have a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to also make a comment that, I do think without any level of regulation, I think in 10 to 20 years, we would be very unhappy with what our community looked like. So I'm very far away from my ward mate on this.
Ms. Hart, and then Ms. West.
Thank you, Jordan. I first have a question. Will multi-family housing fall under this discussion at all, Laval?
Just a sec. The focus is on how land is developed in terms of, you know, creating new parcels and the site aspect of it, and not as much on the building development. But this is all development regulation aspects, and TED is one. Townhome exemption developments is one of those places where we may learn some new things, where we may explore some other things and think about uses that are going inside of it and what we can do from state law or suggested changes. That's a place where we might be talking about multi-dwelling or other uses. I guess maybe Jessica or somebody else has some other aspects of it in terms of the way that regulations align with each other.
Yeah, I think that some of that has to do with implementation related to the housing policy. But as Lavelle said, I mean, this is really, this work is really focused on kind of the land subdivision aspect, but within any land use code, a single regulation doesn't stand alone, right? There are lots of other things that feed into it. And so if there's a specific aspect that you're interested in us exploring, and potentially through a best practices analysis or something like that, we'd like to know now so that we can start kind of setting that up.
Perfect. So along those lines, Jessica, when I think about all the very contentious land use planning meetings we've had with every single development that's come before us, typically people point to an example of where it's a multi-dwelling kind of environment where it's high density. And it's not the high density part, I think, that bothers people, because I think people get that. It's how it's designed that is not at all very considerate of a quality of life. Yes, people have a roof over their heads, but it doesn't evoke the sense of neighborliness that when people are in a single family housing zoning, where they feel like, you know, they can get outside and meet their neighbors. And so, you know, my colleague, Mr. Ramos, talked about private property rights, which is good, but we can't also forget that just human rights is a really important thing. And part of that is we have to recognize that more than half of our population doesn't own property, and that they should still have a high quality of life. And so I just want to make sure we put that into context as well. So Jordan, if you're starting to take scores from people, let us know.
Okay, I think if folks want to throw out scores, you're welcome to. I think that's fine at any time. Just a time check, we have about 13 minutes left in the meeting. We do have a couple more slides with more questions. So we'll go to Ms. West, and then maybe if anyone has any kind of quick comments on this before we move on.
I just have a really quick comment, I think maybe towards the end of this process, when there is the larger open house and public discussion. I think we need to be very clear at communicating what is at zero, I guess, especially with subdivision. And I know this was mentioned in this presentation already, is that there are a lot of state level rules already in place. And so zero doesn't, in this context, doesn't mean no regulation. And I think people need to know what that baseline is. So I think that should be communicated as simply as possible, because it doesn't seem simple at all to me, but that would be helpful.
Mr. Ramos?
Did you want me to field that real quick, Heidi?
No. This is purely for communicating with the public later on.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay, great. I have one more thing that I want to add on this, and I think that for me, I think that there are regulatory frameworks that are inherently flexible. So I think that there's things like, form-based code or other things that provide flexibility and predictability. And I am not at all shying away from robust but reasonable requirements. I think that they need to be reasonable, they need to be predictable, they need to be attainable and affordable. But in my opinion, requirements are okay as long as they're fair. So, anyone else on this slide before we move on? Okay, I think we can move forward.
Okay, great. And we do want to be respectful of time. I think we are interested in understanding how policies may be specifically related to climate policy, growth policy, and housing policy should be implemented into the code. Brooks, are you thinking that we focus on this one and then try to get to some of the other slides, or should we move ahead from your perspective?
Yes, I think this is really kind of the question I was excited to get to, and I think it was somewhat discussed in our last piece. I think Missoula has a lot of policies, especially when you combine city and county and policies overall. And so, I think if every single policy, complete streets, and everything else was required, I think that's a lot of potential barriers to supply and represent costs that will ultimately be passed on to people looking for housing. So I think, one piece of that is to identify which policies are the most important. And I know that's tough to do at times, but consider that within the context of how those policies would be implemented. So are there some, and I'm just using complete streets as an example, that should be written into code and required, or are there some or all of them that should be incentivized? So if you are able to meet certain complete street standards, then you receive incentives, density bonuses, or potentially avoid development fees. And then on the developer side, how are those implemented? Do they need to build them physically? Do they need to include bike racks, for example, on the property? Or is it a fee that is then given back to the city to kind of disperse community-wide? So boiling it down to those two questions, we know there's a lot of policies. I'd love to hear your thoughts on which are the most important to you and which you think are the most important to the community, and then understanding that every policy written into the code kind of represents a barrier. How would you want those written into the code, and how would you want a developer to have to achieve those?
Okay, great. Anyone? Heidi, go ahead.
All right, thanks. So I guess I think we should be writing at least some policies into code, because otherwise I don't think we are going to achieve some of our goals. And I think our housing policy includes goals for building out housing, both affordable housing and rental housing that are affordable folks earning 120, this is my son, and 100% area median income. And currently there aren't any tools to generate housing at that income level that are like subsidized, whether it's HUD or other sources. And so I think that this is definitely an opportunity to create a process that would generate homes affordable to folks earning those incomes in our community. Whether that, and I don't know that that would look like inclusionary zoning, but I think that especially if subdivisions and TEDs have a more uniform process, that there's definitely room to create incentives for meeting those affordable housing goals. And I don't think we're going to meet those without having intentional and planned and permanently affordable housing that gets built out. And I guess my just second caveat is that, you know, we are talking about the built environment, and there's many things that make our environment, I guess, livable, and making sure that it is a human scale neighborhood, or, you know, is important. And I think that can look different in different parts of town. So I wouldn't want to make it too inflexible, but definitely having a place you can, I don't know, walk and bike helps reach other community goals, whether it's, you know, less waste or meeting climate goals. And then I'll just add my peer community right here so that I don't have to comment again. But I was gonna suggest Bend, Oregon as a peer community to look at. It's fairly similar in population, and I think they are doing some pretty cool things related to affordable housing, and they should be on the list. So thanks.
Great. I'm going to make a quick remark about public comment. I have not seen anyone come into the waiting room throughout the meeting. That option does still exist for the next couple minutes, but I'm also going to direct people to our voicemail box, 406-552-6012. You can call and leave a voicemail. It goes to all the city council, and I will, if it's specific to this project, I'll forward it on to the consultant team. And also our email, council@ci.missoula.mt.us, again, goes to all council members and will be disseminated appropriately. Ms. Cheryl and then Ms. Becerra.
So I think this first question, how should policies be implemented into the code, was actually what I was asking on the past slide, because we do have a lot of policies, and you know, if we're not including all of our policies in the code, which sounds like from what Brooks said would be very arduous and may end up making it too restrictive to allow development very easily and inexpensively, then how do we decide which ones we're incorporating? I think that's, I guess I'm curious to hear what Brooks or someone else on the team has, what other communities have done with respect to that. I mean, or do we just have so many policies that we're unique in that respect?
You're definitely not unique in that respect. And I think it is about identifying what are your priorities. And that's something that we can help facilitate through future conversations as we're finalizing a recommendations report. So it could be that some of your mobility and connectivity goals are really important, but maybe only in certain areas within the city. And so we can write recommendations to set you up for implementing it in that way. It could be that there are policies that talk about incentives that are really not about development, and they are about other city programs. And so we wouldn't want to incorporate those into the land use code. So there will be some of that kind of sifting out as we move forward.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Becerra and then Ms. Jones. And if everyone's okay, I'd like to go about 5 minutes over and end it at 12:45. And feel free, if people need to leave, you can go ahead and do that. Ms. Becerra.
Thanks. I guess I don't see policies necessarily as a barrier to implementing our code. In my opinion, I think policies are a way to bring some of the current needs that the community has to a code that's not really working for us right now. So it's a way to supplement our code. And my hope is that as we move towards a form-based code, that we're going to have less need to have some of those policies do that work in the code. So I would say that until we get to that point where we have a code that's really working for us, and it's going to be working and addressing the needs of the community as we move forward, that our policies are a good way to, the only way maybe that we have to bring some sense of community needs into the code. Does that make sense? I guess I feel that they right now they have been contributing and adding to how we implement our code. And as we move towards a different kind of code, a form-based code, that we're going to have less need for those policies to be brought into it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Jones and then Mr. Van Lossberg. Gwen, you're muted.
Thanks, Jordan. I don't really have anything to add. I think Merita said it really well. I think the policies are important, and I'll just leave it as Merita articulated it. The one thing I just wanted to add was in terms of peer cities, I don't know Bend, Oregon very well. I've spent a little bit of time there. I think that's a really interesting, I'd like to look at that further, but in my mind, first of all, I don't feel like there's a direct comparison between Missoula and other cities in Montana because I think they each have unique scenarios in terms of space limitations and water sources and all of that. But I can tell you, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else in Montana than in Missoula. I think Missoula has done a great job of being a really beautiful, livable city. But I guess what I would like to point in the direction of is I think we should be looking at other cities in the Rocky Mountains, a little bit bigger and a little bit smaller than Missoula, to see what the success stories have been. Because I think the fact that we are geographically bounded by mountains and we have limited space to develop, we are an island, inherently creates difficulties in providing affordable housing. And we're starting, when I was growing up, we didn't have this problem. There was plenty of land to develop. We no longer have that luxury. And so I'm curious as to what other mountain towns have done to address this and what has worked and what has not worked. And I just think that's a really good direction to go in terms of lessons to be learned. Thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Van Lossberg.
Thanks. I agree with Gwen on some of those points, and I think it's important to underscore Missoula is unique within the state, and there is no other place within the state I'd rather live than in this community, and that's a reflection. I guess that is a bit of a tortured way of saying it's it's a bit of an impossible question to answer in terms of ranking the policies that have come through, and I don't think you're going to get a well thought out sort of ranking of that, frankly, in a discussion like this. All of those policies are important. I would, I guess, throw out a few things of consideration, and that I think there's a temporal or a time component to some of our policies, and I think about the Complete Streets policy that preceded everyone on this council and has kind of stood a test of time with some tweaks and such. I think about the way, the community looked at sidewalks, 10, 20, 50 years ago versus the way we look at that today in relation to, mobility goals, among other sorts of aspects. I think there's some value in looking at things like, for instance, the community had a pretty long-ranging discussion around broadband and the benefits, the pros and cons of a municipal broadband system. And I think what's interesting there is the way that the infrastructure, the way that fiber was looked at before and years ago versus now as essentially a component of infrastructure, not unlike streets. And there's been a shift over time of the way we look at that. And I think that our regulations and what we would require, changes over time as well. And I guess the last thing, again, to point out is the policies that we have been developing over the last several years. There's some under consideration right now around climate change and climate resiliency. I think it's less clear how we might express those policy goals and objectives in land use sort of code or building code, it doesn't mean we shouldn't. And I guess because there's maybe less clarity around that and a greater opportunity for innovation, I kind of tend to default to an incentive, looking at incentives to try to, assist the market or spur the market, toward meeting objectives that the community has expressed via policy. So again, what I'm trying to express is I think it's worth looking at the policies we've passed and prior councils have passed over time and see how the way we as a community view those. There are things we now take for granted that we wouldn't have taken for granted as necessary things to do, 5, 10, 20 years ago. So I'll stop.
Okay, great. We are a few minutes over time, so I'd like to turn it back over to consultant team and Lavelle for any wrap up here.
Great, thank you. I want to thank everyone for a really great conversation and some good feedback. If you have additional thoughts on peer communities, please feel free to pass those on directly to Lavelle. We are getting ready to launch into that, and so that's something that we'd love to get your feedback on. And this is not the last time you will see us, so expect to see us again here in probably 6 to 8 weeks, and then again towards the end of this process. And again, just thank you so much, and I'll just turn it back to Lavelle.
Thank you. Also, we don't need to tally technical scores and numbers out of the slides. I think the idea with that was to spur the conversation, and I think every one of those sliders with the slides was challenging conversation. It was difficult to embrace, and I really do appreciate your insights and your considerations of the breadth of all of this that has to do with development regulations. So with that, send me an email if you have some thoughts on the peer communities. We will continue to frame and balance the ideas that we're hearing. Yes, we have some state law that we have to work within already. So we will take all of this within the context of what can we do, how can we do it, what can we propose to the state for future considerations, et cetera. And just stay tuned, because this is the beginning of the process where over the course of time it will continue to evolve, and you will have the engagemissoula.com website to look at as well. And I'll do what I can through Jordan to help give you any future updates. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. I really appreciate everyone's time, and thanks to the team from Design Workshop for dialing in, and we hope to see you in person when we're able to do that. So, and then again, if anyone has any additional feedback, you're welcome to send that to me, and I can pass it on, or to Lavelle as well. So we are over time, so I'm going to adjourn the meeting and see you again shortly for the next committee. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not hearing any sound. Can somebody give me a sound check?
Hi, dear.
I can hear
Perfect.
you.
Thank you.
I'm going to be eating popcorn through this meeting.
Are we are we ready to roll?
See, join without.
Okay. Did you get ARP? Because I noticed it didn't quite work. So now if you go back to this and hit your little widget, dude, that's going to pull this up. So make sure HARP is green because I noticed that it didn't get clicked. Stacy wasn't the other one. She might be here. So I would double check her.
Okay.
But otherwise it looks good.
Otherwise it's just Julie and Jesse and then I'm good to go, right? Okay.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And I'm going to call the Public Works Committee. Just a brief comment to everyone attending the meeting. As obviously this meeting is being held virtually, so we'll be doing public comment a little bit differently than usual via a live call and phone line. Just like calling into a radio show or making a pledge during a telethon. I'll call for general public comment on that item, and I will take comments on items that are on the agenda and items that are not on the agenda. I will also open the public comment phone lines on each agenda item. Each time we call for public comment, we'll put the numbers up on the screen with the meeting ID, and I will call on the commenter to please mute the computer or TV so that we can hear you better. Please be aware that there's a delay of about 50 seconds from what you're hearing at home in the actual meeting. So it's okay to begin speaking right away when I call on you. We'll be observing a speaking limit of about 3 minutes so that we can hear everyone who wants to comment. And with that, I will ask the staff, please put the phone numbers up on the screen. And I will have a roll call for members to determine who is here. Okay. Anderson?
Here.
Becerra's here. Contos?
Here.
Harp?
Here.
Yes.
Here.
Jones?
Here.
Merritt? Not here. Ramos? I think he had to excuse himself. Cheryl?
Present.
Masika?
Present.
Von Lossberg?
Here.
And West?
Here.
Okay. So I will take a look now and see if we have anyone calling in. I have a phone number ending in 44. Is that staff? No. Just one more piece of information for those of you who might not be able to look at the screen. The phone numbers to call are 253-215-8782, and from a landline, 888-475-4499, and the meeting ID is 960-049-3694. Okay. We will now move to, I don't see anyone on the waiting room. So approval of minutes. Are there any changes or amendments to the minutes? See none. Those will be approved. And I don't see anyone for public comment. So we will move to our first item on the agenda. And that is to authorize the mayor to execute a subscription renewal contract with Ride Amigos for commuter transportation information and trip planning services in the Missoula region. And Aaron Wilson will present on that item.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Aaron Wilson's the transportation planning manager. This is more or less a routine request to do a contract renewal for the Ride Amigos app. This is a piece of software that we use in my office for Missoula in Motion that that has a lot of different functions. We've been using it for about 3 years now, and it's the primary platform that supports the Way to Go Club. And a lot of our commuter tracking and incentive programs, carpool, there's a whole host of features that are included in that web app. And so it's integrated into Missoula Motion's website. It provides that commuter information for people, whether it is for logging trips or finding routes to, say if you're wanting to bike, or explore different options. It has all of that information sort of contained in one platform. And it's sort of Ride Amigos, when we first were looking for a platform to do all of these things, Ride Amigos was really the only provider that offered all of those different services that we were hoping to include and support the different programs that we have within Missoula in Motion. There are other software platforms that are out there. It's a changing environment. It seems like similar to every other online platform that things change every year. But it is still based on some of the research that Missoula Motion staff have done. They try to keep up on what the best practices are and what tools are out there. And Ride Amigos still provides really the best level of service. Plus, it's what we've been using for 3 years, so there's the familiarity that all of the users have. They're used to using it. We're used to using it. We have a lot of data contained in it. And so this essentially allows us to continue to use that for the next 2 years, or would have a contract for the next 2 years of service. It's already included in Missoula in Motion's budget, so there's no impact on the city's budget. It's also covered by the federal congestion mitigation air quality funding that we get through the Metropolitan Planning Organization to fund Missoula in Motion. So it's part of that CMAQ budget that MIM prepares every year. So federal funds are covering the cost. It's $16,000 a year for the next 2 years. And then we would have an opportunity at that time to reevaluate whether it's still the best platform, if there are other ways that we might want to think about going. But it allows us to continue that, provide the same platform, the same services, and the same functionality for folks who are participating in the Way to Go Club or the business programs or other outreach that Missoula in Motion engages in. And Catherine's here with me if there are specific questions related to the platform itself or the contract or how we're using it, or anything else that you might have of interest. So I think I'll leave it at that unless there are other questions from the committee.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Are there any questions from council members? I don't see. Oh, yeah. Okay. Sandra.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to double check that this is purely funded by grants and has nothing to do with property taxes.
Yep, correct. This is the Missoula in Motion is 100% funded through our congestion mitigation and air quality contracts through the MPO. So those are federal funds that get allocated through the MPO to the city of Missoula for Missoula in Motion.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks. Amber?
I'm just curious. So, Missoula in Motion is using this app, but our users in the community are using it as well, correct? Okay, I'm just getting that right. Do you track and maybe I missed this, do we track how many users we have? Can we do that?
Yep. Yeah, we can track the number of users. It's how we administer a lot of the engagement and kind of reward programs. So people are logging trips, they're logging what mode they use, how far it was. It has trip planning tools that people can use. It's really more a tool for engaging with the community rather than something we use internally, although it does collect all of that data. And so over the years, we've been able to do some more in-depth analysis on some of those commuter programs and seeing, are people's trip behaviors changing? How are they changing? People can record commutes and errands. And so we get some of that data that we don't get from other places in terms of where are people commuting by different modes, what types of trips they're using. And so it's a pretty powerful platform in terms of both providing services and collecting data that we can then use to evaluate how successful we are on our programs and evaluate whether we need to make changes or how we can be more effective in the work that we do.
That's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. I do need a motion. Would anyone like to make the motion? Okay, Ms. West.
I would love to make the recommended motion. I am an intermittent user of this platform, and especially during our competitions that we have community-wide during our commuter challenge. It's a super fun platform. It's easy to use, but it also is just it's nice to see, for example, how much CO2 I've saved by walking or busing or biking rather than driving my car. And I think it's a really useful tool for people to have access to. And I hope we renew this contract for another 2 years.
Thanks, Heidi. This is a motion. We have a motion on the floor, so I'm going to open it up for public comment. If we could get that information on the screen, that would be great. I'm going to read the number again, and that is 267-831-0333. From a landline, that is 888-475-4495, and the meeting ID number is 960-049-3694. Do we have anyone? No, we don't have any public comment. Okay, so I will ask for a roll call vote, please.
Anderson?
Yes.
Becerra?
Yes.
Contos?
Yes.
Harp?
Yes.
Hess?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Cheryl?
Yes.
Vasika?
Yes.
Von Lossberg?
Yes.
And West?
Yes.
All right, that is unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. We will move to our next item on the agenda, and that is an appointment to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board by Mayor John Engen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Again, it's appointment day, apparently. Bringing you the appointment of Eugene Schmitz. Mr. Schmitz had previously served as chair of this board, had to step away for health reasons, and is now healthy and interested in continuing his service, and I would recommend your confirmation of the appointment.
Okay, so we have a recommended motion, and could we please have a roll call vote? Actually, I think we need.
Motion.
I'm sorry?
I said, would that I could make your motion, but I can't.
Oh, okay. We do need a motion. Ms. Cheryl.
I'd be happy to make that motion.
Thank you. And again, I will open this for public comment. So if we could have that screen, that information on the screen, that'd be great. Okay. And I don't see anyone in our waiting room. Okay. Let's have a roll call vote now on the motion, please.
Anderson?
Yes. Yes.
Sorry. Becerra?
Yes.
Contos?
Yes.
Harp?
Yes.
Hess?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Basika,
Yes.
Van Lossberg,
Yes.
and West.
Yes.
And we are unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, so we'll move to our next item on the agenda. That is an amendment number 3 to the hybrid poplar wastewater reuse land use application service agreement with HEG Montana LLC, and Dennis Bowman is here to present.
Good afternoon, Dennis Bowman, Deputy Public Works Director of the Utilities. I'm here to ask you to approve and authorize the mayor to sign the amendment number 3 with HEG Montana LLC for the hybrid poplar wastewater reuse land application service agreement for fiscal year 20 and 21 at a cost not to exceed $243,238.71. Primarily is when the original contract was set up, it was done on an annual basis, calendar year. We're converting it over to the fiscal year, so that way it matches our budget process. Along with this is that HEG used to hire the arborist every spring and do a survey of the trees, the condition of the trees, and come up with a plan of what has to be taken out and what has to be done to the trees. We switched that over to use the city services. The Park and Rec is doing that and utilizing their new software of the tree conditions and inventory of the trees. So basically what it does is that it saves us some money by using city staff. In the past, like I said, they used to have an arborist come in. We would pay HEG to hire an arborist, but that arborist would say, we need to do all this work. And I felt it was kind of a conflict of interest because the work that he pointed out needed to be done, he got the work. So we're trying to be as efficient as possible on this and make sure that we're making the best of it for it. And this is all coming out of the wastewater enterprise fund. It doesn't come out of the general fund, taxes, or anything at all. And it's in our current budget.
Thank you, Dennis. Are there questions from staff? Okay, I see Sandra, go ahead.
So from my understanding, we just raised the stormwater fees. Does this have anything to do with that increase in the fees?
Nothing at all, because this is all the wastewater, all the sewer department. Has nothing to do with the stormwater department at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And we do have some public comment, but Brian, would you like to go ahead and then I'll open it for public comment.
Sure, I'm happy to make the recommended motion, and I was hoping that Dennis could just speak to briefly the role of the poplar plantation. You know, we haven't reviewed this probably in a while, and I know generally speaking for newer folks on council that it serves a role in terms of effluent treatment that helps us with our permitting requirements and nutrient load associated with wastewater, but I'm sure Dennis could speak to it more accurately and articulately than I could.
Sure. Basically, this was set up in order to, because of our current permit, we're allowed to discharge into the Clark Fork River, but we have to monitor the nutrients that go into it, like the phosphorus and nitrous. If we get up too high, basically what it is we have to upgrade our treatment plant. So under our current permit for the state, we're okay. But the plan came up, I think it was back in 2013-14, is that instead of discharging effluent, a portion of effluent into the Clark Fork River, utilize it to grow trees like the poplar trees. And at the time, there was a big demand for these poplar trees. So basically, we're sending about 1 million to 1.5 million gallons a day over to take care of these trees, which really work out good. Initially, we had some spikes at the beginning with increased expenses to get it all established. The new owners with HEG has taken it over and worked with us, and we're really maintaining and making it more cost effective. We're also taking the trees and kind of recycling it back around. Any trees that have to be taken out, we're taking those trees out and taking it to the compost. So we're utilizing it in the compost facility too. So as you guys all seen before, our circle of water life between stormwater, wastewater, and the water department, included in that is the compost and these trees. So it's really, really worked out good for the community and us. My estimate, and I've gotten reports from consultants, if we have to do something with the treatment plant because the permit changes, you're looking at a $50 to $75 million cost to upgrade our plant. By doing this cost per year and utilizing the product, it saves the community, saves everybody by doing this. So it's a really, really good green way to do this. We are working, and I'll put on there that we have been working with HEG a lot, looking at the expenses and that, and we will be looking at it and working with them in the future to do more stuff that the city would take more, if not all of the activities over from the poplar trees, as if they want to try to transition out of this process.
Great, thank you, Dennis. Any other questions from staff, members? Okay, we do have one caller. You can go ahead.
Hey, Mirta, it's John Dabari calling. Good afternoon to everyone on council. I don't know if there's a bit of a delay on the phone call, but I'll do my best to kind of get through this. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. I just want to support the recommended motion. As Dennis had indicated, we had made a shift to put the budgeting on the city's fiscal year cycle. So that might be a bit of a difference from what we saw last year when we looked at this and approved a contract. As he indicated, over the last year since I and a few other folks took over management of the Poplar Farm, there's been a different conceptualization about how to run that. And that was done jointly through conversations with Dennis and other folks at Wastewater and other folks that we were able to reach out to in the community. And whereas when we first started this project, we were looking at doing using those trees for saw logs and selling the actual timber for milling purposes, we are now re-envisioning how those trees are going to be used to cycle back into use at the compost facility. So I think there's been an evolution of thinking regarding how to manage the Poplar Farm, and we've been adaptive to changing market conditions and different ways of doing management. And I really appreciate the work that Dennis and his staff have put into working through this. As you may notice in the contract that there are a couple of items that are specifically called out, like developing a weed management and maintenance plan, working with Willows, and also to put together a harvest rotation plan. Those are all things that have yet to be spec'd out completely. There's not a scope of work necessarily assigned to that, and therefore there's no budget for that. But these are important components of this contract to work out this year. Obviously, as we're pouring 1 million to 1.5 million gallons of supercharged nitrogen and phosphorus lead-in water onto the ground, not only does it do a great job of growing poplar trees, but it does a great job of growing weeds. So we want to be really attentive. And I've had conversations with Morgan and other folks around trying to put a plan together to deal with weeds. As Dennis mentioned, and as I just brought up, the idea now is to use those poplar trees in processing at the compost facility. So we do need to come up with a plan about how to harvest those trees, where to harvest those trees, how many to harvest, and implement that plan going forward so that we are providing a sustainable supply of wood to the compost facility, but not also dramatically changing the look and feel of the poplar plantation as well. So, and the willow part of that. As you may remember from conversations we had last year, we're going to be taking some of the trees from the poplar plantation and using them for stream bank stabilization up in the Rattlesnake as that dam comes out. And we've been growing willows out at the Poplar Farm as well, and we're going to be using willows from the Poplar Farm to do restoration work up at the Rattlesnake Dam removal project as well. So a bunch of things going on, and I guess I'll be available for questions if you guys have them.
Thanks, John. Are there any questions from council members? I see Heidi West. Go ahead.
Hi, John. I have a question. I guess maybe it has to do with the undefined harvest rotation plan. But I was wondering if using the poplars in this closed loop with the composting facility, if you envision this, I guess, being harvested more often and having each, I guess, planting cycle having a shorter growing span, and if that has a resulting like higher carbon sequestration impact. I don't know. I was just curious, I guess, how you see that impacting the lifetime of the plantation over, harvest logs.
I just had to unmute myself. So I don't necessarily have a good answer to your question. I think as we begin to consider how we wind up removing trees and how many we wind up removing, we'll have a better idea of some of those longer term effects. I think Dennis may actually be able to answer some of this. There's been some additional work from a contractor in Helena to study the efficacy of using the poplar farm to supply the compost facility, and so that report may have more detailed information regarding some of the things that you're asking. But I don't know. We just haven't dug into this yet, so I don't have a good answer for your question.
I can add on to that a little bit. Yes, we did hire a consultant to kind of look at that. Since the market changed where we can't use it for board, there's not a much call for using it for regular lumber and that. With the 80,000 trees, approximately 80,000 trees that are out there, we will, in the future, we will need that for compost facility as long as if everybody keeps dumping their yard waste and tree branches and everything out there, we will still need some of the trees from the poplar farm to take care of and meet the needs at compost. We are going to do it strategically. We're going to do it. We're not going to go in there and cut everything down because that would ruin the appearance and everything. So we want to do some testing. Like this year, we're going to take 80 out that are falling over in that. So we're going to get good prices. So my goal is that to look and see what the cost is to take 100 trees out or 500 trees out and do it strategically throughout the plant, throughout the poplar trees that supports compost, but also it gives us a good idea what it costs us to do this, because we have to look at this as not only for this year or next year. I got to look at it from 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what the impact and what the cost and the feasibility of continue on doing this. The preliminary numbers show yes, this is feasible to do this, but at the same time, we've all seen changes in finances of that. I got to look from 5 to 10 years from now.
Great, thank you. So Dennis, it looks like this is a somewhat of a moving, evolving environment, and we might see more documents that come before council for addressing some of these changes, as well as some potential amendments from now until in the near future. Are there any other questions from council members? Okay, I don't see any. John, do you have anything else to add? John DeBari?
Yeah, sorry about the muting thing again. There's a bit of a delay when you push the buttons. So yeah, I appreciate what Dennis said. I was nodding, and of course you couldn't see me. But as to Heidi's point, we're at the very beginning of trying to figure out some of this, and I think we all have. I guess I'm speaking for Dennis here. Have viewed this as an adaptive kind of endeavor. Where conditions change, we're willing to roll with that and figure out new ways of trying to deal with management out there. And I think it's really an awesome opportunity for us to, as somebody said, close the circle and use those trees in our own compost facility. And there's years and years and years worth of supply of trees out there to supply the compost facility. So I think, as Dennis indicated, we'll just start small and we'll try to figure out how this all works, understand what the labor and costs are associated with that, and the benefit that it provides the compost facility. And so, yeah, to your point, Mirta, I hope that we will see some additional documents, for lack of a better word, as you use that, coming through council, because there hopefully will be an opportunity to do some of this additional work out there this year and get that lined out. And then, as was indicated earlier on, this is a contract amendment. The original contract was with HEG was signed back in 2013, and I think, Dennis and I and Dale have been talking about this. There's a need to readdress that original contract and try to get rid of the things that really just don't reflect reality anymore. I think it's totally appropriate to do these annual work plans and budgets, but I think it would also be really useful to reground ourselves in revising sort of the basic premise of the original contract, and to try to handle a couple of other items that Dennis, Dale, and I have been discussing about the future of the farm too. So I hope that we can move forward in a reasonably quick fashion to try to address some of these actual work items that need to take place out there, and also some larger strategic things.
Great, thank you. So I do need a motion. Would anyone like to make this motion?
Point of order, Mitch, I think I already made the
Sure.
motion.
Oh, you did. I'm sorry, Brian. Yes, you did. Okay.
No worries.
So we have a motion on the floor. Thanks, John, for participating. I'm gonna open it for any additional public comment. If we can put that number again on the screen, that would be great. Okay, and I would like to add that if anyone calls with comments about this item or any other item on the agenda, we will be in receipt of your comments. So if you if you can't make the call right now, we will receive your comments. Okay, I don't see anyone else. Thank you. If we can get a roll call vote, that would be great.
Anderson,
Yes.
Becerra,
Yes?
Contos,
Yes.
Harp,
Yes.
Hess,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Basika,
Yes.
Von Lossberg,
Yes.
West.
Yes.
We are unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Nice seeing you. Stay safe.
Thank you, Dennis. You too. Okay, our next item on the agenda is Northwestern Energy Streetlight LED Conversion Project, MOA, and Streetlight District MOU, and that is going to be presented by Jeremy Keene. Hi, Jeremy.
Hey, good afternoon. Jeremy Keene, Public Works Director. I have a short presentation, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. And hopefully that is coming through on the screen. So we have two things before you today. We have a request to approve a memorandum of agreement with Northwestern Energy for the streetlight LED conversion project, and a memorandum of understanding with Northwestern Energy about streetlight districts. And what we did here is we created two separate agreements. One is with the specific project that they are working on right now, and lays out specific responsibilities between Northwestern and the city and expectations for that project. And then the MOU is designed more to establish some working relationships in terms of how we go for streetlight districts in the future. So a little background here. We have about 59 active street lighting districts in the city. These were created between 1912 and 1995 The majority were created over 30 years ago. And we really haven't done a lot of, we haven't made a lot of changes to them, and we haven't added new streetlight districts in over 20 years. Some of the council concerns that were expressed prior around their street lighting program were that we don't really have good lighting quality, and a lot of times it's in the wrong places. Either there's lights where we don't want them, or we don't have lighting where we do need street lighting. In a lot of cases, it's not compliant with our dark skies ordinance, our street lighting ordinance. And in some cases, we can't get the poles we want, where we're using decorative poles in our downtown areas. Those poles aren't available through Northwestern. There's been a lot of concern that we're paying too much. These districts have been around for a long time. We've paid the same rates for them over many, many years. And most likely we've paid back the capital costs of those districts many times over. So there's concern that we're paying too much. We did some independent analysis. We hired a consultant to take a look at this for us, to give us some information on how this looks from the city's perspective. And you know, what they came back and said is that an LED conversion results in both cost savings for energy and maintenance. And they said it's probably about a 2 to 3 year payback on the capital investment to do this conversion project. So we had Northwestern at council back in December, and they presented the program that they're working on. It's a statewide project. They're working to convert all of their streetlights throughout the state to LEDs. And this will have a big power savings, and also increases the life of those fixtures. And all this is done with no upfront cost. So they don't charge the cities to do this. And then we also see the immediate savings from those more efficient fixtures. So they've given us estimates that for the districts within the city and county, it could be as much as $96,000 a year in energy savings. The costs for the program are captured in future lighting tariffs or future rates that are set by the Public Service Commission. So what happens is when they go back for their next rate adjustment, which could happen in 5 or 10 years, it's not a set schedule, they'll roll those capital costs and those maintenance costs into those future rates. So, you know, we looked at what are our goals and objectives for the city in terms of what we want from lighting, and came up with these 3 primary goals. That, you know, we want lighting to improve safety, and that means really focusing on problem intersections, places like pedestrian crossings, where we really want to improve the personal, you know, safety and comfort of getting around. Lighting should be attractive and sensitive to the environment. We want to make it, you know, scaled to a pedestrian scale and have a consistent look and feel. We want to light to the appropriate levels. We don't want to overlight things. Color spectrum is something that's become really important with LED lighting, because it tends to be a more pure white light. And that technology evolved to have some better color spectrums available that are softer, more friendly lights that don't feel so harsh. And so we're working on making sure that color spectrum is part of our standards. And then obviously we want it to be dark skies compliant with our lighting. And then finally, we want the lighting districts to be easy to understand and fully and fairly assess those costs. And our takeaway from this is we'd be better off doing our own lighting and owning and maintaining it ourselves, and putting those into districts, because that way we can capture the cost of install lighting, but we don't have to pay it back multiple times over time. The trouble with that is it's hard to do that, and we're not in a position right now where we can go and relight the whole city and put in all new equipment. That's a major lift, and the advantage of the Northwestern Energy lighting program is the pole already there. We already have lighting, and there's not a big capital investment that needs to happen in order to make those improvements. And so, you know, we're looking ahead to the future, but we recognize right now that the project that Northwestern is doing makes sense, both from an energy standpoint and from a standpoint of getting better lighting. It's an incremental improvement. And so we're recommending that we go ahead with that. The project details for Northwestern's project, it's about 1,800 lights that will get replaced. They're not replacing the poles, so this is just replacing the fixture. You know, think about it as swapping out the bulb. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's really all they're doing. So it's not a holistic replacement or upgrade to the lighting that we have. It only applies to street lighting that are in lighting districts. And as I said before, there's no upfront cost to the city. So we will get that better light quality and the reduced energy use. For the city itself, these are for the districts that we actually have in the city. They're estimating $79,000 a year will be our savings in terms of energy savings. So what the MOA does is it outlines the city's and Northwestern's objectives, roles, and responsibilities. We wanted to have a real clear inventory of all the lights and GIS data for those. So we've worked hard with Northwestern Energy to reconcile all of that inventory and get everything into a list, and that's attached to the agreement. And that'll be a working document that we update every year so that we have current information, keep it current. We'll agree on the fixture style, wattage, and lumens. That's how bright it is, and the color temperature. So they've provided us with some engineering around lighting analysis that shows how bright the lights will be and what color spectrum they're going to use, so that we can evaluate and make sure that it's complying with our ordinance and that we're getting the light standard that we want, depending on which street that we're lighting. So residential streets tend to get a lower level of light. And as we get into the higher level streets like arterials and collectors, we want to have brighter, more intense lighting. And finally, we wanted to have a clear process for addressing citizen complaints. One of the things that will happen when we upgrade these lights is they're going to be brighter, and that's two reasons. One is that the lights that we have out there now have degraded to the point where they're not putting out a lot of light. So just replacing them was going to make them brighter. And then secondly, the LEDs have a brighter color spectrum, and so it feels brighter. So we expect that some people are going to feel like that's too bright, and we're going to need to work with those folks to mitigate that through either adjusting the optics of the light or putting some shielding in to make lights directed where we really need it to go. And Northwestern is committed to helping us do that and responding to those complaints. Finally, as I said before, we do need to comply with our lighting standards. There are some conditions where we're not going to be able to meet our standards unless we were to go in and replace all the poles. We don't think that's feasible right now, so we're going to need to work through a variance process to our lighting ordinance for those specific cases where we can't meet the lighting standard. And what we've talked about there is that we're not making the situation worse. It's an improvement over the current condition, but there may be some situations where we can't fully meet the ordinance. And the most obvious one is where we have lights that cast light onto people's private property. Our ordinance says that light needs to be cut off at the property line. Well, with certain light styles, that's just not feasible to do unless you replace the whole pole and actually move the pole. So we think that we can do a lot to reduce the amount of light that's being cast outside of the public right of way, but we're not going to be able to prevent that entirely. Finally, the agreement speaks to the need to inspect and replace poles as they age and provide regular maintenance. These are a couple of pages from the presentation that Northwestern gave us back in December, just to show you what we're talking about. These are your standard Cobra headlights. This is the most typical street light type. Going from an HPS, a sodium bulb, to a LED fixture. these will swap over very well, and we're able to get good optics with lights to get the light where we want it. So this is kind of the priority to get these going first. And I think it represents the majority of the lights that we're doing. We have two other styles, and these are the tricky ones. These are the ones that tend to put light outside of the right of way. And you can see why. It's a pole top fixture that casts light in all directions. And what we're going to do is switch over from this contemporary style to this Lexington style, which lets us direct the light. It does a better job of directing the light where we want it. These are the two light patterns. And you can see how the shape of the lighting distribution is different with these two different light fixtures. So it'll be an improvement, and there's some opportunity to direct the light and shield it, but we can't completely keep it out of private property. Okay, finally, the MOU. This is really just to establish a path forward. That we do look at combining lighting districts into either one district or multiple but fewer districts throughout the city where it makes sense. And a good example is in downtown. I think we have something like 13 different districts. It would make a lot more sense to have one district for downtown and to be working on relighting downtown in a way that we really want to do that. So that's a longer term goal that we'll work towards. And finally, we think there's an opportunity here to look at using the energy cost savings to improve the system. So this has to be done within each district, but if there are places where we'd like to have more poles and more light, we could request Northwestern Energy to install some additional poles and then use that savings to pay for it so that we don't add additional costs to the ratepayers. The other option is obviously you can just turn that savings back to the ratepayers and reduce the cost of lighting in those districts. Okay, that's all I have. We have a couple of representatives from Northwestern Energy here today who can also take questions, and I will stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy. I see a couple of hands up, so I will start with Brian.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. I appreciated that you went back and reviewed the concerns that council had raised from that earlier meeting, and this feels like a comprehensive approach. I haven't been through the MOU in any kind of excruciating detail, but I appreciated the way you touched on the items in the presentation. One, I guess a request I would make, and I don't know if it sounds like the MOU contemplates this, but let me throw it out to you. I thought you made a great point, for instance, on the issue of people are going to notice when these lights get replaced that it's brighter, even if it's compliant with everything, simply because of the degradation of the existing lights. And I think about the one right outside my house that is going to be like that. I'm wondering if you and Northwestern could discuss the feasibility of doing, I guess I'll call it a demo in advance or very early on in the process in a neighborhood somewhere where that we invited, perhaps media to try and do some proactive highlighting of the change that people are going to experience. I think the simplest way I could put it is this is either going to move forward and we'll be in a reactive mode dealing with those aspects that the community encounters even when everything's compliant, or there's an opportunity to do some installations, get some press and information out to the public around the changes that they're going to see. And I'm sure it won't eliminate concerns about it, but I think it'll go a long way toward getting people some sense of what they could expect to see with the changeover, if that makes any sense. So I'm hoping that is something that be feasible and that you and Northwestern could explore in conjunction with our communications folks early on in the process.
Yeah, I'll let George speak to that. We have done some beta testing already. There are some lights out there. It's been informative.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks, Commissioner, for the question. Yes, as Jeremy just said, we did do some beta testing on Spruce Street near St. Pat's Hospital. Has already been converted. The HIP strip has already been converted, and at the Northwestern Energy office along Russell, we've converted lights around the building. So, and there's been a request for or offers for community to come out and look at those. So that's been done. And I know from experience in other cities where we converted Billings all last year, we had good feedback. Yes, a few instances of people reaching out with some concerns, but those are pretty minimal by and large. So,
Mirta, could I clarify?
Yes, please.
And thanks. I'm well aware of the examples that have been done, like on Higgins and the Spruce Street location. What I'm thinking of is more a case where we look at an installation of a pole or two in a residential neighborhood as it currently is, sort of pre-changeover, and then right after. Those ones that have been up for a while, we're not going to be able to achieve what I'm sort of envisioning with the communications folks with the ones that already exist. I appreciate that they exist, but there's a real opportunity to just go into a neighborhood, take a look at a pole, that degraded light, capture what it's like, do a changeover, explain the change and what people will see, and communicate to that to the public more broadly. So I may not be doing the best job of articulating this, but it's something beyond or different to what has already been done with those pilot installations.
So just to clarify, you're suggesting that we go into the neighborhood, say there's 30 lights in the neighborhood, we convert 2 of them over to the new fixtures and use that as a kind of a showcase for that neighborhood.
If it's okay, Mirta. I don't want to turn it into a super labor intensive thing where it's neighborhood by neighborhood. What I'm trying to get at is Heidi and I from Ward 1 live in the north side. If when that happens throughout the north side folks are going to be wondering what the heck happened. And this is going to happen all across the community. If we could document and get some press coverage around the change, here's what it's like, and then here's it's going to be like with a changeover. I think that could be used, community wide, or maybe it's a couple cases. I'm not asking you to do it neighborhood by neighborhood, but to just get out in front of it proactively.
Yeah.
I think we could also use the the places that have been already replaced as examples, as you know, the communication is made available to the community so they can have an idea of what to expect, more or less. Okay, I have Gwen next.
Thanks. And to follow up on what Brian was saying first, I'm going to promote the HIP strip. I'm excited to know that the HIP strip has had a changeover with these lights, and tell everyone to go check out the lights and also go to the local businesses on the HIP strip to revive our economy. So that'll be my message this next week. But my question is, Jeremy, I appreciate you addressing the financing structure behind our lighting system. And it has been an ongoing topic on City Council for many, many years now, that we basically rent the lights and have paid for them many times over. And I appreciate the context that, however, to go in and redo all of the infrastructure is simply incredibly burdensome. I guess as a city councilor, every once in a while, I get a question about our lighting system and why don't we own it? And I'm wondering, was there discussion about any middle ground? In my mind, the perfect world would be we lease to own, something like that. I don't know if that's, I know this is a much broader conversation, and we frankly have a very specific MOU regarding LED lighting today in front of us. So I recognize that, but nonetheless, could Northwestern Energy and Jeremy, could you guys address that? Is there any possibility of a way forward of ever leasing to own so that we don't pay for this infrastructure many times over, but it's a little bit more constructive financially?
Well, the answer to that is it's a state program, and so you have to make those changes at the state level, and it's through the Public Service Commission, so it's tough. There's a lot to it. It's hard to carve out something that's unique to Missoula. We did ask if they were interested in selling us the system, and the answer was no. So unless Northwestern were a willing seller, there's not an easy way to do it, but working on some state level changes to the loan program is something that I think is worth looking at.
Thanks. And I would like to apologize in advance that we have about 2 minutes left for our meeting. So if it's okay, we'll go a little bit over just to make sure that we address everyone's comments and public comment. I have Heather and then Heidi.
Thanks, Marita. This question is for George Horvath. Kind of what I was thinking of, George, is even though the LEDs is going to save us a great deal in terms of energy costs, what I'm wondering is if maybe there's perhaps some residential areas where you have existing poles that it might make sense to use a motion detectable kind of LED light in hopes of actually reducing even more energy consumption.
You know, there's lots of possibilities with these LED lights. Right now, our rates are dusk to dawn, and there's pretty standard rates. A new photo eye could be added in the future that could be remotely controlled by a wireless network. You can dim the lights in the future with that added technology. The fixtures we're buying are capable for future quote unquote smart city initiatives, which would allow for dimming, controlling the lights at different hours of the night. So after 2 a.m. they get dimmed or shut off. So those are all possible add-ons to what the LEDs that we're buying, but that's not part of our rates. It's not part of the offering we have today, but they are smart city ready for the future.
Okay, so that could be something we can negotiate later on.
Potentially, yes. But as someone else mentioned, it's a statewide, and Sarah could speak to this better, it's statewide rates, so it all would be done through Public Service Commission, I'm sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Heidi?
Thank you. So I've seen a presentation about this now at council and before that at the Montana League of Cities and Towns conference, I think last fall. And I guess I am a little bit surprised by the estimate of not seeing a raise hike for 5 to 10 years that was just mentioned. I was under the impression it would likely happen kind of in the middle of the statewide LED rollout. So I guess my question is to Northwestern representatives on when they are planning on approaching the PSC. And then my second question is if the communities that have LEDs and those that have not received the upgrade yet, if those are going to be segregated in that request.
Madam Chair, committee members, Sarah Norcott on behalf of Northwestern, I'll take an attempt to answer those questions twice. As to when we approach the Public Service Commission to change the rates, it's an unknown. It's something that Northwestern evaluates every year to determine whether or not it'll go to the commission to ask for a change in electric rates, recognizing that street lighting rates fall within the broader spectrum of electric rates. So it's something that we do evaluate every year and assess whether or not we want to go forward and we need to make that case to the Public Service Commission. Our last rate case, we just concluded one. We filed it in September of 2018. And that was the first one that we had in Montana in over 10 years. I wouldn't put money on it, but I'm pretty sure it will not be another 10 years before we go back to the Montana Commission to change rates. It could be, 2 years from now, it could be 5 years from now. And I just can't give you an estimate because like I said, we do evaluate that every year. So I can't speak to the time frame. And I think your second question was talking about the communities that had not been converted. For example, if we go to the commission in 2 years in 2022, what will be captured in rates then is all the capital costs we've spent to date. In that 2022 would be the year the case was filed, but it would capture costs through 2021, through the end of the test year. And so if there's still project costs in 2023 and 2024, those would be captured in the next rate case that we file. So it would be an incremental change in the rates if we go in before the project is entirely complete.
Okay, thanks, Heidi. Anything else? Thank you, Sarah. Any other questions from council members? Okay, so we have a recommended motion. Would anyone like to make that motion? Heather.
I am happy to make the recommended motion.
Thank you. And before we vote, I would like to open it for public comment. I don't see anyone waiting to provide public comment, but if we could quickly put that information on the screen in case people want to make any comments, that would be great. Thank you. And again, the number to call 215-8782 or 888-475-4499. And the meeting ID 960-049-3694. And as I mentioned before, if we don't hear from you today, we will get your comments later on. Okay. I don't see anyone in the waiting room or who's trying to make public comments. So could we please have a roll call vote?
Anderson,
Yes.
Becerra,
Yes.
Contos,
Yes.
Harp,
Yes.
Hess,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Vasika,
Yes.
Von Lossberg,
Yes.
West,
No.
Okay.
okay, so 9 yes and 1 no.
Thank you. Anything else from any council members?
Mirta,
Yes.
would Heidi like that on the consent agenda or on committee
Yes.
reports?
Thank you, Brian. Heidi?
I think the consent agenda is fine, but I was hoping we'd get a quick moment. I guess I missed the speaking to the motion part.
Go ahead.
Oh, I guess my worry around this is that that it isn't the best investment of our funds. I think with a payoff of 2 to 3 years, if we could put in the infrastructure and pay it off in 2 to 3 years, that would be a much more responsible use of our funds, especially when we potentially have a very limited return on the savings that are going to be brought by switching our fixtures to LED. And I do think that, with our water utility, which has a much longer payoff, that is something our community was willing to support. And I think that with a 2 to 3 year payoff on, having control over our street lighting, I think that would be a great deal for our citizens. And I do worry about the statewide impact on this. I think that there's potential inequities in who is going to benefit from this first, and we will benefit. And I think some of our rural counterparts would see increased rates without also seeing the cost savings for a while. So yeah, but it can be on committee, not committee reports, the consent agenda.
Thanks, Heidi. Comments are noted, and yeah, we'll put this on the consent agenda. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and the discussion. This is the last item on the agenda. Again, I'm sorry we went over a few minutes, but with that, we would be adjourned. Thank you.